The butler of Grand Duke Winthrop's residence, Alan, came out to the gates to meet the new nannies. The older one was named Evelyn, and the second, a tall, red-haired young woman with green eyes, was named Bella. The butler invited them in, and first of all, to thoroughly familiarize themselves with the estate's layout. Alan explained that the master was not overly fastidious, but he had been at war for a long time, so he was sensitive to rules and order. The butler showed the nannies to the reception room of the residence, where less important guests were usually received. In the middle of the room hung a large, wall-sized portrait of the great Duke, Ryan Winthrop himself. Bella approached the painting and carefully examined the man depicted in it, for he was exactly as she had imagined him. All these people were characters from the book The Bloody Throne and the Silver Vow. The Emperor's illegitimate son, Cale Winthrop, met Duke Rutherford right before an assassination attempt on the latter, joined his family, fell in love with his daughter, and decided to reclaim his true status. At that time, in the Lannic Empire, Emperor Adrian Winthrop's tyranny grew stronger every day. After leaving the Duke's house, Cale joined the rebels and proved himself, which led to the Emperor's execution. But the joy of victory was short-lived, as the rebel leader, the Emperor's nephew Aaron Winthrop, whom everyone trusted, suddenly revealed his ambitions. His actions ultimately led the Empire to its downfall. Unable to bear witness to all this horror, Cale personally executed Aaron Winthrop, proved his lineage, and ascended to the throne. In the end, he took his beloved as his wife, making her empress. Such was the plot of the novel that the heroine wrote at night, as during the day she was torn between two jobs. The writer was very tired, but she needed to finish the chapter to fully pay off her younger siblings' tuition loans. The girl's head was throbbing so much that she fell out of her chair, feeling like she was about to die from overwork. Her life had been hard, so there was absolutely nothing to regret, except, perhaps, for the unfinished novel into which she had poured so much love. When the heroine opened her eyes, she couldn't understand where she was for a while. At first, she thought someone had taken her to the hospital when she lost consciousness, but the room's setting didn't look like a medical one. The girl started pinching her face, hoping it was just a dream and she wouldn't have to pay for a VIP room. And suddenly, the woman standing nearby in a maid's dress exclaimed that Lady Vienna needed to get dressed immediately. She asked her to hurry before the Count started to complain, as an important guest was due to arrive soon. Rubbing her cheek, which she had just pinched, the girl finally realized with horror that this was not a dream at all. She had landed in the world of her own novel, and what's more, in the body of a character who dies without a single line. Hastily dressing and running out into the courtyard, the heroine tried to understand how she had managed to be reborn as Vienna Tangerine. The Tangerines were a family of corrupt aristocrats who supported the tyrant emperor Adrian Winthrop. The current head of the family, Count Tangerine, in order to curry favor with His Majesty, sent his 3 daughters to him as concubines. The girl tried to understand exactly what point in time she had arrived at, because it was obvious that the Count had not yet sold Vienna to the harem. And suddenly, she overheard the maids talking about how Ryan Winthrop, who had been granted the title of Grand Duke, was returning to the capital. They were discussing his incredible beauty and how the hero of the empire differed from his brother, the emperor. The heroine remembered the maid's words that an important guest was expected in the county. And since this guest arrived at the same time as Ryan's return, it meant that Vienna would be given as a concubine today. And a few days after arriving at the palace, the girl would die at the hands of the emperor just because she averted her gaze. Not wanting to die such a dog's death, the heroine decided that she needed to escape. And when the maid came to invite her mistress downstairs, she found neither Vienna's belongings nor Vienna herself in the room. The girl couldn't have imagined that escaping would be so easy, because, as it turned out, there was no security at all in the Count's house. If stories about __quote_0___ protagonists were to be believed, in real life she was already dead. And yet, the reader's reaction to the book had been excellent, and a photo shoot had even been scheduled. Nevertheless, the girl had hope of returning to reality if she could manage not to die and survive in this world for longer. As she fled, Vienna grabbed all the valuable jewelry, so all she had to do was figure out how to settle in comfortably. However, all the girl's plans immediately vanished as a thief running by snatched the bag of jewels from her hands. The heroine couldn't believe she had been robbed. She hadn't even managed to get out of the county. However, a man standing around the corner who had seen what happened tripped the thief, and he fell face first to the ground. The man noticed the criminal sneaking behind the lady, followed him, and his fears were confirmed. He let the thief go, warning him that if he was caught again, he shouldn't expect any mercy. The savior returned the young woman's satchel and advised her not to walk alone on the streets at night. He was surprised why a noble lady would go for a walk without servants. Since Vienna couldn't admit that she had run away from home, she lied and said she was simply bored. The man's keen attention didn't miss that the girl looked like a runaway aristocrat, but her manner of speech was not noble. When he said goodbye, Vienna asked for the name of her savior. It turned out to be His Majesty's bodyguard, Edward's Kamar. The heroine was shocked that she was saved by none other than the emperor's right-hand man, who did not shy away from any atrocities. Edwards was interested in why the girl was so surprised to hear his name. The heroine nervously smiled and replied that she did not expect to receive help from such an important person. Edwards explained that this was also part of his duties, and again advised her to be more careful, as the capital had been restless lately. After saying goodbye to the villain, Vienna decided to find a safe place to spend the night as soon as possible. She had left home without thinking at all about where to go, and even though this was a world from a novel she had written, she couldn't know absolutely everything that was happening there. Currently, a tyrannical emperor was wreaking havoc in the country. In a feudal society, where politics were in disarray, safety was surely also a problem. The common people, who had nothing to eat or wear, would surely do anything to survive. The main characters of the novel were still children, and besides, the Duchy of Rutherford, where they live, is closely connected to the House of Tangerine. The girl needed to find those who knew neither her nor the Count, so she tried to remember if there was such a character in the book. After thinking it over carefully, she finally remembered Duke Ryan, whom the maids had been talking about that morning. Adrian was the firstborn of the Imperial Winthrop family to seize power, and Ryan was his younger brother. He was a hero who saved the country and was loved by the people, but ultimately died unjustly at the hands of the emperor. And a decade later, his son, Aaron Winthrop, driven by a thirst for revenge, gathered a rebel army. And although he exacted his long-awaited revenge, consumed by madness, he continued an endless massacre. His goal was the destruction of the entire empire, and this was the emergence of the true villain, hiding in the shadows of the tyrannical emperor. Waking up the next morning in the inn, the heroine pondered her plan. Due to the emperor's jealousy, Ryan always remained on the border, so he was barely acquainted with Count Tangerine. And since the Grand Duke was still alive, it meant his son had not yet turned to the dark side. And since Ryan Winthrop was the character who loved the common people more than all the other heroes she had created, and was generous with his servants, the girl decided to get a job with him under a false name. When the Duke returned to the capital, the residents greeted him as a hero, with jubilation and reverence. Ryan was struck by how much the emperor's reputation had deteriorated during his absence. People shouted after the great Duke, asking him to take care of the common folk. Upon returning to the capital, Ryan's first act was to request an audience with His Majesty. He greeted his brother, officially kneeling before him, but Adrian told him to rise, emphasizing that a hero had no need to be so polite. Nevertheless, Ryan replied that he was His Majesty's eternal servant, and all his merits belonged to the emperor. Adrian had already heard rumors of how the capital's residents fell prostrate and solemnly greeted him when he returned victorious. Without raising his head, the Duke replied that the rumors had simply acquired unnecessary details. Adrian remembered that when his younger brother was born, the boy was prophesied to become the savior of the empire, and that was how the people now called him. But Ryan expressed hope that the wise emperor would never believe such absurd words, spoken by flattering people who tried to curry favor with their family. The emperor confirmed this, but he was only worried that, intoxicated by the crowd's jubilation, his brother would begin to harbor vain hopes. Nevertheless, Ryan asked him to be calm about it, as he was well aware of his duty. When the conversation was over, Adrian told his brother to go home and rest after the long journey. When the Duke left, he asked Edwards if he thought such words should be believed. The bodyguard answered in the affirmative, but stressed that it would be wise to monitor the Duke's actions to ensure his thoughts matched his words. The emperor no longer doubted that recalling Ryan to the capital was the right decision. When the duke arrived at the estate, he was very surprised by its dismal condition. Apparently, Adrian had not fulfilled his promise to entrust the repairs to the palace servants, so Ryan ordered Alan to hire people for the job himself. The butler felt very sorry for his master, because His Majesty had presented everything as if he had summoned the Grand Duke to the capital and personally prepared the estate for him. Ryan didn't want to continue this conversation and suggested to Alan that, since things had turned out this way, they should just get to work. The butler reported that young Master Aaron was strictly following the schedule set by the Duke. As for the nannies, 2 had been recommended through their former servant, and they were expected to arrive at the estate in a week. Since the Duke had told Alan to hire as many people as needed to finish the renovations on time, the mansion was ready in a week. When the nannies arrived, Ryan came to meet them with his adjutant, Owen. The butler introduced Evelyn and Bella to him, and Bella was thinking at that moment that she needed to get used to her new name. The heroine couldn't enter the Duke's house as a Tangerine, so she bought a suitable identity. The real Bella, who had to leave her newborn child and essentially sell herself to the Duke's estate, had no reason to refuse the offer. So she agreed to switch places with Vienna in exchange for the jewels she had brought with her when she escaped. The Duke reviewed the dossiers provided to him, but for some reason he stared too intently at the young nanny. It even seemed to the heroine that he had guessed everything. However, Ryan said nothing, and only told the butler to familiarize the new workers with the rules of the estate. When the servants left the room, he was ready to hear the adjutant's report. By order of the Duke, Owen checked the tax revenues for the past few years, and it turned out that the taxes were indeed high, and the people's discontent was very great. Noting that they had a lot of work to do, Ryan told him to check the identities of the new nannies, especially the one named Bella. In the Duke's opinion, she looks too young and healthy for a woman who recently gave birth and wandered in need. He suspected that the girl might be his brother's spy. Alan informed the nannies that the young master's meals were strictly on schedule, and the menu was also determined by the master, so they had to cook strictly according to it. Dinner was strictly before 5 in the evening, and no more eating was allowed, and eating sweets was punishable according to military regulations. The heroine was so surprised by such strict rules that she couldn't tear herself away from them, but the butler told her to follow him further. Next, they went to Aaron's room, next to which was a small bedroom where nannies were supposed to take turns staying overnight on their duty days. The young master was to get up every morning at 6 o'clock, and being late was forbidden. Evelyn promised to follow these rules no matter what. Bella decided to follow her example, and made exactly the same bow as her colleague. The heroine was determined to learn the etiquette of this world in this way. Next, the servants went to inspect the training ground. Aaron Winthrop was having a fencing lesson there. According to the butler, the young master always works hard to live up to the Grand Duke's expectations. Seeing Aaron, the heroine froze, unable to believe that this little boy was the main villain of the novel. Mentally, the girl asked for his forgiveness for making such a pure and sweet child into a villain as the author. The reason Aaron became like that was the Duke's death. The heroine wondered what would have happened if Ryan hadn't died, and the boy hadn't had to experience the pain of losing his father. As the master found out, Aaron trained from morning until noon, and during that time, no one was to disturb him. Since the young master was on a break, Alan suggested that the nannies greet him. However, when the butler introduced Evelyn and Bella, the boy showed little interest and reacted quite coldly. It seemed to the heroine that Aaron was sweating too much and looked very pale. Since the girls were to start their duties tomorrow, Alan asked the master to choose one of them as a personal nanny. Without hesitation, Aaron pointed at Evelyn. The woman looked at Bella so triumphantly, as if they had been fighting for this position. The butler ordered the girl to go to the kitchen and heat water for the young master's bath. Bella set off to complete the task, and only on the way did she realize that she didn't know how to make a fire. Suddenly, the heroine remembered something, stopped abruptly, and rushed to Aaron. Evelyn rudely advised her to mind her own business, as the young master had chosen her as his personal nanny. But the girl, ignoring her, asked the master if he felt pain in his chest when breathing, and if he felt discomfort in his throat during sleep, which greatly surprised Aaron, because everything was exactly as she described. When Alan approached them to find out what was wrong, Bella said that the boy was sick and needed urgent treatment. The butler was shocked by her words that the young master's life might be in danger. The girl asked him to look at the bruises, which are often a symptom of lung problems, as indicated by increased sweating. After listening to her, Alan rushed to send for a healer immediately. When the healer examined the boy, he confirmed the nanny's words and diagnosed a lung disease. If the illness hadn't been discovered in time, the internal bleeding would have worsened and a tragedy could have occurred. After prescribing medicine to the young master, the doctor bowed and departed. The Duke sat down next to his son and asked why he hadn't mentioned how he was feeling. The boy blushed with embarrassment and admitted that he was afraid of disappointing his father. The Duke also returned wounded from the battlefield, and Aaron wanted to do the same as him. Ryan asked him never to hide his condition again, because he was just a child and not on the battlefield. After getting a promise from his son, the Duke stood up to return to his duties. As he was leaving, Aaron advised him to rest and take care of his health too. The heroine noticed how sad the boy's gaze was at that moment, as he probably wanted to stay with his father longer. The Duke's voice distracted the girl from these thoughts, as he clarified if she was the one who noticed Aaron's wound. Praising her, he asked how Belly noticed what even the butler had missed, and inquired if she had studied medicine. The girl said that her younger brother loved martial arts as a child and often got injured, and she learned all this while taking care of him. Since her experience saved Aaron, the Duke told her to continue looking after him carefully and left the room. Meanwhile, Evelyn glared at Bella, who could thwart her plans, and thought that urgent measures needed to be taken against this. In the evening, before going to bed, the heroine sat down with her notebook to write down her thoughts, as she needed a plan. She took a job at the Grand Duke's residence without much thought, but even there, it was far from safe. Soon the Emperor would start pressuring Ryan, and she needed to protect him somehow. Adrian Winthrop appeared to be a foolish playboy and tyrant, but in reality, it was just a mask. This man was calculating and treacherous, like a venomous snake, and according to the plot, he sent a hired assassin to his brother, while the heroine had no combat skills to fight the assassin. It would also be impossible to convince the Duke not to contradict Adrian, because he was the embodiment of honesty and incorruptibility, who would not silently watch the Emperor's atrocities. The option of staying here for a while and then escaping scared Bella, because she had already experienced how cruel the world outside was. Therefore, the best idea seemed to her to gain Ryan's trust and help him with the information she had, because surviving under the wing of such a powerful person was much more reliable. And to become a reliable ally of the Duke, Bella first needed to find an approach to his son. Aaron turned out to be a kind and well-mannered boy. He never even complained once when he had to drink bitter medicine. Seeing how attached the young master was to Bella, the butler appointed the girl as his personal nanny, and soon the boy fully recovered. They attended his lessons together and sometimes got scolded for dozing off. Aaron and Bella walked and spent almost all their time together until bedtime. Besides, the heroine learned that Ryan cared for his son much more than it seemed at first glance. He just didn't know how to express his feelings. Seeing how much these two cherished each other, the residence she had chosen only for survival began to feel like home to her. One day, Bella made cheese cookies and brought them to the young master to treat him. Aaron visibly saddened because it was almost lunchtime, and he wasn't allowed to eat sweets before a meal. The heroine replied that there was still plenty of time before lunch and promised not to tell the master anything. However, no sooner had she offered Aaron the treat than Alan appeared out of nowhere and confiscated her cookies. Carrying the tray out of the room, the butler tasted the pastry and noted that it was actually delicious. The girl made a funny face, accusing the man of simply wanting to eat everything himself, which made Aaron laugh a lot. And when Bella promised to bake more, the boy laughingly said that she shouldn't, otherwise Alan would get fat. Evelyn, meanwhile, watched the events unfold from the sidelines, her brows furrowed in anger. A few days later, as the Duke, as was his custom, was reading a book at the appointed hour, there was a knock at the door. Bella peeked into the study and asked for permission to speak with him about the young master. Ryan immediately understood that the conversation would be about Aaron's birthday. He was right, because the nanny came to announce her desire to throw a party. Since the Duke had been at the border for a long time and couldn't properly celebrate his son's birthdays, he was interested in the girl's idea. Bella said that the servants, like His Grace, were also preparing gifts for Aren with all their hearts. Besides that, she was going to bake a beautiful cake using the freshest ingredients. The Duke also didn't have to worry about the party refreshments, as Bella promised to prepare a lavish spread so that everyone would be satisfied. Ryan settled more comfortably in his armchair and told the girl to continue. Bella suggested inviting young ladies and gentlemen, Aren's peers, considering it an excellent opportunity for him to make friends and gain experience in social interaction. However, when she suggested inviting their parents as well, the Duke cut her off, saying that was out of the question. In response to Bella's confusion, Ryan dryly stated that he didn't have to account to her for his decisions. Remembering that she had entered a world where social classes played an important role and she had no right to argue, the heroine apologized. However, the Duke himself noted that the girl might not have known about the unstable political situation, where inviting outsiders into the house was not the best idea. The heroine mentally chastised herself for getting too deep into the role of a nanny and overlooking the fact that the Emperor was surely watching Ryan and might decide that his brother was gathering supporters for a conspiracy. She apologized to the Duke for her short-sightedness, as he had only just returned to the capital and was not in the mood for festivities. In her defense, Bella said that she wanted the young master to have happy childhood memories, but she hadn't thought about the political consequences. Hearing these words, Ryan pondered, as Aaron would surely have liked to celebrate his birthday with friends, and since he didn't give a definitive refusal, he stated that a small celebration could be arranged among family and servants. The heroine was pleased, as she knew Aaron would be happy even with a modest party among family. Because the Duke was constantly away on battlefields, and every one of his son's birthdays went unnoticed, he entrusted the organization of the celebration to Bella. The girl thanked him for his trust and promised to do her best to meet his expectations. She was about to leave the office when Ryan suddenly stopped her. He wanted to hear Bella's opinion on what would be best to give Aaron. Since such a question meant that the Duke had begun to trust her, the heroine needed to give him sound advice. She replied that understanding children wasn't that difficult, and what mattered to them wasn't expensive gifts, but those that showed parental love. The Duke was at a loss, as he had no idea how exactly he could express his love for his son. The girl smiled and advised his radiance to make something with his own hands. With these words, she bowed and finally left the study. The day came when the Emperor was presented with the tax revenues for the current month. Adrian was very surprised to learn that revenues had decreased by about a third compared to last month. According to Edwards, this was due to a decrease in the population's income because of famine and natural disasters. And although they asked for tax reductions, the Emperor would not hear of it and ordered the lords to collect more. He was confident that those who owned land would somehow manage and pay. Edwards tried to politely object to His Majesty because they already paid tribute annually, but due to drought and crop failure, their income had fallen, and the demand to raise taxes could cause discontent. In response, the Emperor advised Kamar, if he feared a rebellion, to collect taxes under the pretext of helping those affected. His loyal assistant had nothing more to object to, and he humbly bowed. Suddenly, the Emperor remembered that his brother was now also a lord, as he had granted him lands when he returned. He didn't have to explain to Edwards that he wanted to make an example of Ryan for the other lords. When the assistant left the hall, Adrian once again marveled at what a useful person he had acquired. The heroine was preparing dough for a festive cake, humming her favorite song. Suddenly, one of the maids ran into the kitchen and informed Bella that the butler was looking for her to discuss the upcoming event. The girl temporarily put aside her work and ran at Alan's call. When she came out of the kitchen, a female silhouette appeared next to the dough bowl. Upon returning, the heroine tried for some time to understand why Alan said he hadn't been looking for her, but soon she stopped thinking about it and focused on cooking. She decided to bake a refreshing lemon cake, knowing Eren didn't like sweets, and hoping to gain more sympathy points that way. However, as the girl was squeezing lemons, a strange detail caught her attention. When it was time for the celebration, Bella led the birthday boy into the dining room, having covered his eyes with her hands beforehand. When the boy opened his eyes, he was surprised to find a richly laid table with all sorts of treats before him. Aaron was thrilled, and at first he couldn't even believe that all of this was done especially for him. He was happy because he had never seen anything like it in his life. Bella told the boy that the master had ordered an ideal birthday party for him, as he regretted not being able to properly congratulate his son before. Aaron thanked his father, who hadn't expected him to be so happy about the celebration. The next moment, the boy suddenly rushed to the Duke and hugged him tightly. Tears streamed from his eyes, and he confessed that he was very happy and grateful to his father for this. Ryan couldn't help but smile, and stroking his son's head, he replied that he was also very happy. The heroine was very glad, because now it felt like a baby was being raised in this house, and before it was unclear whether it was an estate or a barracks. But suddenly, an adjutant ran into the room and asked His Serene Highness to step out for a moment, as an uninvited guest had arrived. Edwards, who had approached from behind, asked Owen with a smirk since when he had become an uninvited guest in the Duke's house. The heroine flinched, recognizing this man and not understanding what he was doing here. The girl absolutely could not meet him, so she turned away, hoping he wouldn't recognize her. Noticing the set table and learning that it was Aaron's birthday, Edwards declared that it was improper to come empty-handed. After a moment of thought, he suddenly reached for the hilt of his dagger. Owen reacted instantly and pointed his sword at the man to protect his masters. However, Edwards calmly explained that it was a dagger passed down in their family from generation to generation, and he received it in childhood after defeating his older brother. Now the man decided to present this dagger to Aaron as a birthday gift. The boy looked at his father questioningly, and his father allowed him to take the gift. Handing it to Aaron, Edwards wished him to become a strong man who always gets what he wants, just like himself, who once acquired this dagger. After that, Ryan asked the butler to take the boy away. The heroine took Aaron's hand and hurried out of the room with him. As they passed Edwards, it suddenly seemed to him that he had seen that silhouette somewhere before. However, he didn't have time to remember anything, as the Duke addressed him and asked what brought him to their backwater. Edwards laughed, not understanding why such questions were being asked, since Ryan himself knew perfectly well what his job was. Sitting down at the coffee table, he explained that he had arrived on His Majesty's orders to announce the collection of additional funds for the Aid Foundation. Edwards clarified that if the Grand Duke showed generosity first, the other lords would follow his example. Ryan promised to pay if it was about helping the victims, and the guest stood up, considering their conversation over. He was about to leave when the Duke suddenly asked which specific region the collected funds would be sent to. Edwards was confused at first, but then replied as if it were obvious that they would be sent where they were most needed. Ryan admitted that the man was right, and that he was just worrying for nothing. When Edwards finally left, Owen expressed his doubt that His Majesty had decided to help the victims. The Duke himself did not believe it, and that is why he decided to test the messenger. And by his reaction, he was convinced that the Emperor really was not going to send money to the disaster areas. Owen also noticed how unsuccessfully Edwards tried to conceal the fact of the theft. Ryan handed the adjutant a small scroll and told him to find a reliable person to spread the rumor. Just then, Alan entered the reception room to ask the Duke if he would order the festivities to end. However, Ryan smiled and ordered Aaron to be brought in because their party was just beginning. When everyone returned to the table, the Duke suggested his son open the gift he had prepared for him. The boy opened the box and pulled out a doll, in which he recognized himself. Ryan hadn't carved anything in a long time and was worried that his skill wasn't what it used to be, so he offered Aaron another gift if he didn't like this one. But this was quite enough for his son, because it was the best thing he had ever received. The boy hugged the toy tightly and promised to keep it for the rest of his life. Then Bella suggested that the birthday boy blow out the candles and cut the celebratory cake. When the candles were lit, the nanny asked Mr. Aaron to make a wish. The boy closed his eyes, clasped his hands, and wished that he and his father would always be together. And although there could be no doubt about the Duke's love for his son, the heroine didn't understand why he was always so strict with him. She cut the cake and offered his Radiance a piece to try. Ryan knew that the girl always prepared healthy desserts for Aaron, and this one really looked quite appetizing. But as soon as the Duke brought the fork to his mouth, Evelyn burst into the room and declared that Bella had added lye to the dough. According to her, even a small piece of such a treat would corrode everything from the mouth to the esophagus. Without batting an eye, the heroine asked Evelyn if she had any proof, but the woman insisted that they worked in the kitchen all day and saw everything with her own eyes. This prompted Bella to ask a logical question. Why didn't Evelyn stop her? Because in that case, she would become an accomplice. The woman replied that at first, she didn't understand anything, but then she suspected something was wrong and decided to check. To prove her innocence, the heroine speared a piece of cake with a fork and put it in her mouth. Evelyn couldn't understand why this crazy woman decided to eat poison. This is exactly what the heroine wanted to prove, because if there had really been lye in the cake, she wouldn't have eaten it. But nevertheless, she did, and nothing happened to her. And all because when Bella noticed something was wrong, she prepared a new cake and waited for the culprit to reveal themselves. When she added lemon juice to the dough, it bubbled, which only happens when it comes into contact with alkali. And this seemed strange to the girl. The heroine immediately informed the butler that someone had mixed a suspicious substance into the dough. After that, they secretly searched the rooms of all the servants together, and it was in Evelyn's room that a bag of lye was found. And since this substance wasn't used for laundry or cleaning on the estate, there was no point in denying it. Evelyn's legs gave out, and she fell to her knees, unable to deny anything. The Duke demanded an immediate confession as to who exactly ordered her to kill him and Aaron. Evelyn insisted that she didn't intend to kill anyone because she didn't let them eat the cake and did all this only out of envy for Bella, to frame the girl since all the attention went to her. However, this excuse did not change the fact that she almost committed murder. Evelyn admitted her mistake and begged for forgiveness. The Duke didn't want to spoil his son's birthday, so he sent the woman away and told her to await her punishment later. He instructed Alan to handle the matter as, given Evelyn's foolishness, it was unlikely anyone else was behind it all. The butler promised to have a disciplinary talk with the woman and assign her to menial labor. He told Evelyn to follow him, and as they passed Bella, the heroine watched the criminal intently. When the woman drew level with her, the girl whispered, asking if it was true that no one had ordered her to do it. Evelyn raised her head and glared at Bella with a malicious look full of hatred. In the end, the heroine said that she would have rather taken care of the young master one more time than waste time on useless envy. And although it was obvious that Ryan was trying to hush it up, the girl couldn't shake the bad feeling. Meanwhile, the Duke apologized to his son for having to go through such an ordeal on his birthday. However, the boy replied that everything was fine and he had a lot of fun as it was his best party ever. Ryan thanked Aaron, promised to make next year's celebration even grander, and sent him to bed. Bella followed the young master, but her Duke asked her to stay. When they were alone, he asked the girl for her opinion on whether Aaron liked the doll. Bella was sure of it, and even noted with what love this gift was made for the young master. In response to this, Ryan, for some reason, praised the girl. Obviously, this was his way of trying to express his gratitude. He was just too shy to say it directly. When the nanny took Aaron to bed, the Duke thought about how attached his son had become to her. It was better to hush up the incident without a fuss, otherwise the servants might start envying Bella even more. Upon returning to the palace, Edwards told the emperor how Ryan had asked him where the collected funds would be directed. After a short silence, Adrian asked his assistant if he knew why the fish in the pond gathered in a crowd in front of him. Edwards suggested it was all because of the feed, but the emperor dipped an empty hand into the water, and the fish still continued to swim closer. According to Adrian, if he just pretends to be kind, they immediately flock to him, expecting a benefit, even if they end up getting nothing. The guy perfectly understood his thought and promised to find someone who would help His Majesty in the pursuit of profit, a pawn that could be used and discarded. Adrian was once again convinced that his enemy's enemy was his friend, and Edwards was definitely better than his pathetic brother. Kumar smiled and replied that only His Majesty appreciated him properly. A rumor reached the emperor that Edward's brother had married again, this time to the daughter of Marquis Solon. Apparently, father and brother finally came to their senses because Marquis Solon's lands were very extensive and yielded good harvests. In Adrian's opinion, it was time for the young man himself to start a family, but he replied that no one was dearer to him than His Majesty. The emperor was amused by such naivety, because even Edward's brother married those women not out of great love. Adrian considered the union of families to be a union of forces, and if, to prove his loyalty, Kumar had to marry a woman who would be useful. And since Count Kale's sister had arrived at the palace with him, he told Edwards to go and exchange a few words with her. And when the young man tried to object, the emperor declared that he himself would have fun with this girl if she wasn't to his liking. Edwards visibly tensed up and replied that he would go himself. When the young man headed towards the gazebo, the emperor told a maid to take tea and desserts there. In addition, he ordered her to remain there until the end of their conversation, and then report how much time they had spent together. Adrian was sure that the dog would never run away if he held its leash tightly. Meanwhile, Owen appeared before the Duke with a report on everything he had managed to find out. According to the information received, His Majesty was going to send Count Kael to the Vineyard region, where a strong earthquake had occurred just over a month ago. Ryan found this suspicious, as everything should have been restored there by now. Since the Count was a close friend of the Duke before he went to the border, Owen suggested contacting him to find out if he had noticed anything strange. In Ryan's opinion, now that it was unclear whether Kael was a friend or an enemy, a reckless approach could ruin everything. He had barely finished speaking when the butler entered the office to announce the visit of Count Kael and his son. The unexpected visit turned out to be too successful, and the Duke asked Owen to wait, believing that the meeting would clarify how to proceed. Count Kael entered the living room with a radiant smile on his face, and his frowning son walked beside him. The men shook hands for the first time since Ryan had gone to the border. The Count introduced his beloved son Lennon to the Duke and told the boy to say hello. However, he continued to frown and just silently turned away. Ryan asked Alan to introduce Lennon to Aaron, while he and his father would be busy talking. Bella had just finished changing the young master and was adjusting his tie. She left a carafe of milk on the table so Aaron could drink it later. The boy looked so cute that the heroine was ready to kiss and cuddle him. The door opened, and Alan appeared on the threshold, introducing the young master to Count Kael's youngest son. Aaron introduced himself and extended his hand to Lennon in a friendly greeting, but the boy snorted again in displeasure and turned away, just as he had done with the Duke. An awkward silence hung in the air, and Aaron, flustered, lowered his outstretched hand. Since Alan had to return to the masters, Bella promised to take care of both children herself. The original story only stated that Count Kael was one of those who betrayed Ryan and sided with the Emperor. The heroine understood that he had come on business related to His Majesty, but she didn't know what kind of business, so she thought about a way to eavesdrop on the conversation. Meanwhile, Lennon grumbled indignantly that there was nothing special about the Grand Duke's estate. Looking around, he declared that he had anticipated a visit here, but upon arriving he found only junk and no decorations. Suddenly, the boy began to laugh loudly when he saw a mug with a chick on it on the dresser. He called it too childish, and Aaron's eyes welled up with tears because it was his favorite cup. The insolent boy silently tossed it aside with a displeased look. Aaron had time to get scared, but Bella caught the cup in time, thereby causing admiration in the young master. While Lennon, picking his nose, was looking at what he considered a boring book about the history of wars, the heroine was thinking that he probably belonged to the uncontrollable Golden Boys. As if to prove her thoughts, the book flew after the mug, but for Bella, dealing with such a character was as easy as pie, and she caught the flying object again. Seeing this, Lennon accused the staff of trying to shirk cleaning duties in this way. With these words, he began, as if enraged, to scatter every object he could get his hands on throughout the room. But the girl, like a multi-armed goddess, caught absolutely everything, not missing a single item and keeping a smile on her face. When a feather flew at the nanny, Aaron screamed for Lennon to stop it and not dare to hurt Bella. But in her previous life, the heroine had dealt with typical younger brothers since childhood, so dealing with the boy was a piece of cake for her. The last thing that flew at Bella was a jug of milk that was on the dresser, which spilled all over her hair. To Lennon's laughter, Aaron rushed to help the nanny. The heroine told herself that she needed to be patient, because in front of her was just a cute puppy. Aaron told Bella to go change, and then began to scold Lennon, who didn't understand why he was so angry because of some maid. Touched by the young master's protection, the heroine promised to change and quickly returned with a treat. And until then, she asked the children to play together nicely and not to quarrel. Knowing that Bella would be pleased if he kept his promise, Aaron suggested Lennon read a book. However, the latter, not listening to him at all, suddenly took a doll from the dresser, a gift from the Duke, and began shaking it by the head. Aaron exclaimed that he could touch anything but that, and rushed to Lennon to take the doll away. But the boy tripped him and began to tease that the toy was as flimsy as its owner. With these words, Lennon threw the doll to the floor with all his might. Aaron picked up the toy and was horrified to find that it was broken. Tears streamed from the boy's eyes because Lennon had broken the doll his father had made for him. Instead of apologizing, the bully merely feigned surprise that the toy was made not by a servant, but by the Duke, who, according to him, apparently had nothing better to do. Aaron shouted that his father was always very busy, but he specifically made time to give him a birthday present. But Lennon had heard from his father that the Duke had fallen out of favor with the Emperor, after which he was exiled to wander the outskirts, and now he was under surveillance, quiet as a mouse. Unwilling to hear insults directed at his father, Aaron lunged at the guest. Meanwhile, in the reception room, the Count was telling the Duke that he knew perfectly well what kind of person he was, as they had grown up together. But times had changed, and if Ryan wanted to save his life, Cale advised him not to go against His Majesty's will. The Duke did not want to listen to the Earl's lectures, but the latter replied that he was worried about his friend. The Emperor constantly spoke of a prophecy in which his brother was to act as a savior, and the more he became wary, the more cautious, in his opinion, Ryan should be. According to the Duke, when he left, Cale was also full of ambition, but now he had turned into a weakling, bowing his head before the Emperor's power. But the Count cried out that such a noble man simply couldn't understand his worries. He advised Ryan to think about his son and not let the boy grow up without a father. Bella, who was just then going to change, overheard their conversation. She was frightened that Cale might be the very aristocrat from her novel, who acted on behalf of the Emperor and was raking in enormous amounts of money. Upon learning of this, Ryan made the matter public and completely fell out of favor. But since the book didn't specifically state who the Emperor used, that person could have been Cale, which meant the storyline with the Duke's murder had already begun. The heroine needed to stop Ryan, but she didn't know how, as they weren't that close. At that very moment, Lennon's cry came from the nursery, and Bella and the Duke and the Count turned towards the boy's voice. If the heroine had returned to the room looking like that, it would have aroused suspicion, so she needed to change quickly. Since Ryan and Cale hurried to the nursery, the girl decided that everything would be fine there and ran to her room. When the Count opened the door, he found his son in tears, and things were scattered on the floor around the boys. Lennon had bruises on his face, and he complained to his father that Aaron had hit him. The Count hugged the boy and began to comfort him. Aaron, also with small scratches on his face, silently watched them from under his brows. When he looked up, he saw his father, who demanded an explanation of what had happened between them. Frowning, Aaron explained that Lennon was the first to throw his doll on the floor. Realizing that his son wanted to protect the item he had given him, Ryan told him to continue. But Cale intervened in the dialogue, believing that a broken doll was not worth fighting over, and he stated that he would tell a servant to buy him a new one. Aaron replied that such a toy could not be bought anywhere, because his father had made it for him for his birthday, and he also burst into tears. Agreeing that his son should not have acted that way, Cale noted that he still shouldn't have hit him, and suggested they pretend nothing had happened. However, Aaron was not going to meet him halfway, as Lennon spoke ill of his father, threw a jug of milk at Bella, and broke his things. The boy demanded that he apologize to him, his father, and Bella. However, Lennon stated that he had only repeated what he had heard, and besides, he was not going to apologize to some maid. Aaron forbade the boy from speaking that way about someone dear to him. Just then, the heroine returned to the nursery, already changed and with a tray of cookies in her hands. Hearing these words, her heart skipped a beat in a way it hadn't, even when she was confessed love to in her past life. Turning to the girl, the Duke asked where she had been and why she had left. The heroine apologized to His Grace and explained that she had gone to change her clothes because they were wet from the milk. In addition, according to Bella, she had to prepare a new snack, as Mr. Lennon had thrown the previous one on the floor. Ryan looked sternly at the boy and asked if it was true. Lennon trembled with fear, unable to utter a word under the Duke's formidable gaze. The Count asked his son why he had done such a nasty thing and told him to apologize to Aaron. Lennon, head bowed and not looking at the boy, asked for his forgiveness. Cale stated that given the situation, they should no longer remain in the duchy and headed for the exit with his son. But Ryan stopped him and, as a final piece of advice, told him to be more careful in the future and not to speak ill of others in front of his child. The Count snorted, turned around, and walked out the door with his son. Bella rushed to the young master and asked him to take off his clothes to check if he had any bruises. But Aaron smiled and stated that he was fine, as Lennon hadn't been able to hit him. Both the heroine and the Duke standing behind her sighed with relief. Bella praised the boy and added with a smile that if even a scratch appeared on his face, which was a national treasure, it would be a great loss for the entire empire. The Duke coughed, and the girl turned around in fright, thinking she had said something wrong. Ryan looked sternly at his son and explained that hitting people, no matter the reason, was wrong. And although Aaron obediently agreed, Bella noted to herself that if he hadn't hit Lennon, all his things would have been ruined. The boy confirmed that it was wrong to solve a problem with violence, even if the opponent was at fault, because his father taught him to carefully consider his actions. The Duke was glad that his son realized his mistake, and nevertheless ordered him to rewrite the military regulations 10 times after dinner. The heroine was shocked by the harsh punishment and the submissiveness with which Aaron promised to carry it out. When the Duke left the room, she whispered to the boy that she would help him with the task, and he smiled. Suddenly stopping at the threshold, Ryan asked Bella to step out for a moment, and she was afraid that he had heard everything. When they left the room, the Duke was silent for so long that the heroine became somewhat anxious. But at some point, Ryan stopped so abruptly and turned around that the girl, not expecting it, bumped into him. The Duke's expression was so stern that Bella immediately began to make excuses, promising not to help the young master with his task. But Ryan was only surprised by her words, and suddenly, a light breeze blew in through the window. He ruffled the heroine's hair, and she tidied it, tucking it behind her ear. The Duke froze, thinking at that moment only of the pleasant scent emanating from the girl. Pulling himself together, Ryan, for some reason, only told Bella to freeze and walked off towards the study, leaving her bewildered. When the heroine followed him, the Duke told her of his wish for her to be a good friend to Aaron in his absence. He was glad that, because of his excessive strictness, the boy grew up to be too responsible, but he developed a habit of dealing with everything alone, without telling anyone anything. At the same time, Ryan noticed that Aaron's attitude towards Bella was completely different, as if he was communicating with a close, reliable friend. The heroine, surprised that the Duke could be so gentle, replied that she understood what he was talking about. Nevertheless, Ryan did not answer the question of where he was going and for how long, and asked not to question him about it anymore. Bella only expressed hope that the gentleman would not leave his son in the dark, because even though Aaron would not show it, if his father suddenly disappeared again, he would be very worried and very sad. Hoping to find out later through the boy where the Duke was going, the girl insisted that he tell at least his son. And then Ryan confessed that he was going to Winard for a few days, where an earthquake had occurred about a month ago. The heroine's worst assumption turned out to be true, and the Duke is obviously going to check if the aid will actually reach the victims. However, when she tried to find out why he was going to such a distant place, Ryan asked her to leave. The girl bowed and obediently left his office. After leaving the door, she only thought that the Duke should not follow the original plot under any circumstances. Having locked herself in her room, the heroine decided to summarize the original content first. Under the pretext of helping the victims, the Emperor collects funds and then bribes bandits to stage a theft of the transported money. Ryan, having learned the truth, accuses his brother before the vassals, after which an enraged Adrian isolates him from politics, sends him back to the border, and kills him there. Remembering all the plot details, the heroine began to blame herself for writing everything exactly that way. But suddenly, a great idea came to her mind. The next morning, the Duke's first order of business was to ask Owen if a reply had arrived from the ruler of Winard, Lord Colin. According to the adjutant, the Lord named the exact date. In a week, they would meet at Count Kale's estate to transport the money together. In that case, Ryan decided to immediately go to the palace. Owen reported that all collected funds had been checked and sent to the warehouse so they were safe. At that very moment, shouts from the courtyard announced that there was a fire in the warehouse. The Duke and the adjutant immediately went downstairs and watched in shock as the servants extinguished the blazing flames. Alan informed His Grace that, fortunately, there were no casualties and the fire had almost been put out. When the fire was extinguished, the Duke and Owen rushed to the warehouse. There was mostly smoke around, and the humanitarian supplies were all in order. But it seemed to the Duke that something was still amiss, and suddenly he saw a scrap of paper on one of the chests. Ryan looked at the note, and it seemed to him that he had definitely seen this handwriting somewhere before. Later, the results of the fire investigation showed that the initial source of the fire was a haystack near the warehouse entrance, and then the fire spread to the wooden gates. Nothing suspicious was found on the warehouse guards or on the people entering and leaving the warehouse. According to the guards, Bella entered the warehouse once, but other than trying to feed everyone her awful cookies, she did nothing suspicious. The Duke suddenly understood why the handwriting in the note seemed familiar to him. The fire started about 15 minutes after Bella left the warehouse, and when the fire broke out, she also ran to put it out. Upon learning this, it became crystal clear to the Duke exactly how the fire had started. Apparently, Bella added flammable substances to the cookies, which made them look completely inedible. After that, the girl offered the treats to the guards on duty at the warehouse. Naturally, they refused due to the too strange appearance and smell. In the end, Bella left the cookies inside for them to eat later, and she herself hid nearby and, throwing a match, set the warehouse on fire. After that, pretending to help put out the fire, she, as planned, left a note in a prominent place. Imagining all this, the Duke could not help but smile, which greatly surprised the assistant who understood nothing. Coming to his senses, Ryan again assumed a serious expression and asked Owen about the investigation concerning Bella, which he had entrusted to him earlier. The adjutant went to where Bella lived, met with her neighbors and relatives, and most of their words matched the girl's words. The only strange thing was that her husband and child had left the village, and where they had gone was still being investigated. And although Bella should have been severely punished for arson, after reading the note, the Duke did not want to do so. It said that all aid money would be seized by bandits bribed by the Emperor. Obviously, Bella started the fire, confident that it would be investigated, but it was unclear how the girl could have known about Adrian's plans. Be that as it may, Ryan first needed to talk to her. Learning that Bella was at the training ground with Aaron at that moment, the Duke headed there to also check on his son. All of this seemed very strange to Owen, because if His Grace suspected Bella, he would have ordered her immediate arrest. The heroine sat on the bench with a tray of snacks and water for the young master, watching his diligent training. Suddenly, goosebumps ran down her skin and the girl sneezed loudly. Her nose was itching terribly, and that was a clear sign that someone was talking about her. No sooner had Bella thought about it than a large shadow appeared on the ground beneath her feet. The heroine turned around and saw the Duke standing behind her. The girl was so scared that she shrieked and almost dropped the tray from her hands. Ryan held a note in his hands and, looking into her eyes, asked if it was her doing. The heroine pretended not to understand anything, while trying to figure out how he could have guessed. Suddenly, she remembered helping Eren rewrite the military regulations a few days ago, and the Duke apparently recognized her handwriting. An idea came to the girl's mind. If the paper got wet, the handwriting would be illegible, and Ryan wouldn't be able to prove anything. She poured water into a glass and offered it to the Duke, using the excuse that the weather was too hot. Then she deliberately tripped, and the tray flew from her hands along with all its contents. Another moment, and Bella was already lying on the completely soaked Duke. The girl started apologizing, wondering what she was going to do now, because all she wanted was to wet the paper. But Ryan was silent, and for some reason, was pressing on the forehead of the bewildered girl. Finally, when his power of speech returned, the Duke irritably asked how long she intended to lie on him. Bella instantly jumped to her feet, continuing to apologize endlessly. The girl began to wipe his face with a handkerchief and explained that she had simply lost her balance for a moment. The Duke sighed, as he was sure she had done it on purpose. And although the girl insisted it wasn't true, he didn't want to hear anything. Ryan planned to go to the palace at lunchtime, and upon returning in the evening, he intended to ask Bella a few questions, so he advised her to think carefully about how she would answer. Having said that, he left, and the heroine breathed a sigh of relief, as the Duke wasn't too angry. Ryan himself felt a strange tremor in his chest, and his face flushed. The Duke went to the palace to deliver aid to the Vinard region for the Emperor. He asked His Majesty to check the chest to decide if it was enough, and Adrian assigned this task to his assistant. Peeking into the chest, Edwards, with a satisfied smile, declared that His Grace had shown great diligence this time. To this, Ryan replied that he had only fulfilled his duty as a subject of the Empire. His Majesty noted that the Grand Duke's care for the people was no less than his own. He was only interested in why Ryan decided to bring the chest to the palace and offered his brother to take care of their transportation. However, the Duke refused to handle the transportation, citing a rebellion in the northwestern region where he had sent some of his soldiers, leaving few in the capital. The Emperor, who heard about this for the first time, indignantly asked why Ryan had not informed him about the troop movement. The Duke justified this by saying that he thought Adrian had already been informed about everything. And since it was a small-scale rebellion, and the Emperor had not expressed concern, he assumed that His Majesty had tacitly entrusted him with its suppression, and acted accordingly. Adrian confirmed that he had indeed been very busy lately, and added that he would entrust the transportation to Kale. As Ryan left the audience chamber, he was suddenly stopped by Edwards. He noticed that the Duke's face showed no particular regret, even though he was unable to take on the transportation of aid. Ryan smirked, not understanding why he should regret it. But Edwards remembered perfectly how, during his visit to the duchy, he asked which particular region the money was going to. That's when he realized that His Grace was sure that this entire huge sum would not reach the affected region intact and safe. Ryan replied that he had only asked out of pure curiosity and asked not to portray him as such a disloyal subject. When Ryan bowed and left, Edwards couldn't understand if he really hadn't grasped his brother's intentions. Kamar had deliberately provoked the rebellion to prevent the Duke's troops from interfering with the transport, and his indifference in doing so was too strange. Edwards decided it was time to activate the planted spy. Meanwhile, the heroine paced back and forth in the corridor, waiting for the Duke, wondering what she should do now. The girl blamed herself for helping Aaron with his punishment, thus revealing her handwriting. But since she had been caught anyway, Bella decided to admit what was necessary and try to get out of the rest. Soon the Duke returned, and as soon as he saw the girl, he asked if she had thought everything through properly. The heroine bowed and promised to tell him everything honestly, and he approved her decision and told her to follow him to his study. As soon as he sat down in his chair, Bella confessed to setting fire to the warehouse and writing the note, preparing to accept any punishment. Since the girl decided to confess, realizing she couldn't deceive him, the Duke noted that she wasn't as foolish as he thought, but he still wanted to know the purpose of her actions. According to Bella, she considered this method more effective and memorable than if she had said it directly. Ryan sternly asked the girl how an ordinary nanny could know what he was about to do. According to Bella, she learned everything from a friend from her hometown who collects information, but she thought the Duke wouldn't believe an ordinary nanny, so she decided to resort to this method. The Duke asked the girl what they should do now because he too, according to him, was on the Emperor's side. But Bella suddenly cried out in anger that she wasn't going to believe it, knowing how much he loved his people and cherished those around him, and she liked such a master, so she decided to help. Ryan was so shocked by what he heard that his eyes widened in surprise. The heroine herself didn't understand why she suddenly said all that, and an awkward silence hung in the office for a while. Blushing to her ears, the girl began to make excuses, saying that she didn't mean affection between a woman and a man. But the more she spoke, the stranger each of her phrases seemed. Finally, Ryan asked her to stop, as he already perfectly understood what she meant. According to Bella, she knew that the Duke cared whether the funds reached the affected region, and he would be saddened to learn the truth. And if, after that, he quarrels with the Emperor and loses his favor, the situation could endanger his life. The girl suddenly stated that this could negatively affect Aren, and since Ryan didn't understand what she meant, Bella sighed and explained her thoughts to him. She suddenly suggested that, having lost his father, Aren might turn into a war monster to avenge him. Understanding that the gentleman wanted to protect the aid funds, Bella suggested replacing the money in the box with stones right before shipment. Ryan admitted that he had thought about it himself, but he was still interested in how the girl had set the haystacks on fire without leaving any evidence. And although the heroine intended to keep it a secret to use another time, she still had to tell. If milk is boiled at a high temperature, a substance called calcium phosphate settles at the bottom. and if you mix it with charcoal powder and quartz sand, phosphorus is formed. The Duke listened to the girl without any reaction, which made her uncomfortable, but she still continued. Phosphorus powder has a low ignition temperature, so if you sprinkle it on dry hay in hot weather, it will quickly ignite under the influence of sunlight. This is a great way to start a fire without even being at the scene. The Duke noted that Bella acted much more professionally than he thought, because he himself didn't know such a method. In reality, the heroine simply wanted to write her next book in the crime genre, and that's why she knew all this. But in any case, she was relieved to realize that the Duke believed her. Nevertheless, there was still something Ryan didn't understand. Bella's personal data stated that she had never learned to read or write, and it was unclear how she not only knew how to write, but also possessed such complex scientific knowledge. The heroine was thrown into a fever of fright, for she had truly not thought about this at all. Smiling foolishly, she began to stall for time, trying to come up with a plausible excuse. Finally, Bella stated that, like many commoners, she had a difficult family situation, so she couldn't go to school. But since she was very interested in science, she secretly attended her younger brother's lessons, and out of fear that her parents would find out, she pretended she couldn't read. According to the girl, she seemed worthy of praise to the teacher, and he taught her a lot of additional knowledge. Bella stated that the method she mentioned earlier is already widely used in everyday life. Acrobats and street jesters often use phosphorus powder to attract people's attention, and the gentleman might not have seen it before, as he had been at the border for a long time. And although the Duke didn't understand how much truth and how much falsehood there was in Bella's words, her actions ultimately did him no harm. With a sigh, he stated that he could admit her words might be true, but arson was a serious crime. As punishment, Ryan placed the girl under house arrest for 3 days and decided to entrust Aaron's care during that time to someone else. And while Bella is locked in the room, she will need to make that very phosphorus powder she talked about. The Duke decided it might be useful for their future plan and promised that Owen would bring all the necessary ingredients. Tired of this conversation, Ryan asked the girl to leave the office. Happy that everything turned out all right and she wasn't kicked out of the house, the heroine headed for the door, but the Duke suddenly stopped her. And although the girl was seething with indignation inside, she put on a smile and politely asked if he needed anything else. Blushing slightly from embarrassment, Ryan suddenly asked if anything hurt her after their daytime collision. And while the girl was trying to understand what that had just been, the Duke came to his senses and ordered her to leave again. Only after leaving the office did the heroine realize that he was talking about the time she fell on Ryan and spilled water on him. But the Duke himself started pushing her forehead to make her get off him faster. And only now did the girl suddenly realize that he had deliberately caught her because he was afraid she would get hurt if she fell. At night, sitting in her room with a box of matches and bottles of milk, the heroine suddenly felt hungry. Greedy Owen brought so little food, and she expended a lot of energy on physical labor. Bella thought that if she snuck some food from the kitchen at such a late hour, no one would notice, so she quietly peeked out of her room. The moon was so huge and shone so brightly that the corridor was completely lit. After admiring the moon for a while, the girl looked down and suddenly saw Evelyn in the yard. Looking around, she made sure there was no one else nearby and called out to someone. A person in a cloak appeared behind the woman, their face hidden under a hood. When asked why he requested a meeting, the person handed Evelyn a small pouch and stated that his master asked him to give it to her. The woman was glad she was given another chance because with this, she could also get rid of that annoying girl, Bella. The man stated that his master told her not to do anything foolish and to wait quietly, as he was displeased that she was fired from her nanny position, and in case of another mistake, he might order her killed. Evelyn smiled and asked to tell the gentleman to prepare the money, as she had a plan to eliminate Aaron. Bella watched the conspirators from behind a tree, but they spoke so softly that she couldn't hear anything. Just as the girl decided to get closer, someone suddenly called out to her from behind. Turning around, she saw Aaron in front of her, who was surprised that she was outside despite being ordered to stay locked up. Happy that she wasn't caught eavesdropping, the heroine decided to take the boy to his room as soon as possible. She gestured for him to be quiet and asked him to follow her. After moving a sufficient distance away, the girl asked the young master why he was out at such a late hour and where his maid was. As it turned out, the boy had gone out to use the restroom alone and not wake his maid, but he couldn't have imagined that he would meet Bella. With these words, Eden suddenly reached out to the heroine and hugged her tightly. He confessed that he had only not seen her for 2 days, but he already missed her. The heroine smiled and replied that she had missed him too, and had been constantly thinking about him. And although Bella was happy to see Eden, she advised him not to wander alone at night anymore. The heroine asked the boy if he had thought about how she and the Duke would feel if someone seized the young master. Eden replied that he understood everything and promised not to go alone anymore. In that case, Bella asked him to keep what happened tonight a secret between them. The boy happily extended his pinky finger to her, promising that it would be their secret. After that, the heroine took Eden's hand and led him back into the house. She didn't know what Evelyn was up to, but she felt that it wouldn't end well, and she needed to get rid of her before she did something foolish. Meanwhile, at Count Kale's residence, preparations for the journey were in full swing. The captain of the Count's guard, Hector, was overseeing the process, as they needed to depart for the Imperial Palace soon. Kale approached the captain to clarify if he had checked everything, and although Hector had already done everything, he promised to check again and make sure they set off when the Count was at the banquet. Kale advised him not to rush unnecessarily, so as not to lose the box, and to carry it with extreme caution. Just as they finished talking, Count Daisy's younger sister ran into the courtyard. Kale asked the girl to come closer, and the captain greeted the lady, blushing like an embarrassed boy. Daisy couldn't find her brother anywhere, and even thought he had forgotten they were supposed to go to the palace. And although there was still plenty of time before their departure, the girl declared that there was someone there she wanted to impress, so she needed Kale's help choosing a dress. Her brother, with a smirk, asked Daisy who she was planning to show off for. The girl got angry because she knew that Kale perfectly understood who exactly she was referring to. Not wanting to drag it out any longer, she showed her brother a magazine with a picture of a pink and a yellow dress and demanded that he quickly tell her which one to wear. But Kale threw up his hands, stating that he shouldn't be the one to choose because he wasn't the one who had to impress Edwards. Suddenly, Hector interrupted their conversation and advised the lady to wear the pink one, as he thought that color suited her best. The girl laughed and agreed to follow his advice, noting that the captain, as expected, knew her well. Before the men could even blink, Daisy had already run off to change. Kale entrusted Hector with the remaining matters, and Hector, in turn, wished the Count a safe journey. Left alone, the captain wondered why a girl like Daisy was being betrothed to Edwards. Since Kale had worked hard on the case to help the victims, the Emperor arranged a meeting as a sign of gratitude. The Count bowed and stated that he had merely fulfilled his duty as a loyal subject. Adrian asked him to sit down, believing that in private they didn't need to observe such formalities. Since Edwards had given good advice, and thus also contributed to the matter, the Emperor invited him to sit at the table as well, to have lunch together. Adrian offered Kale the seat to his right, and suggested Edwards sit next to Daisy. This way, he said, it would be much easier for this gentleman to court the lady. Noticing Edwards hesitate, the Emperor gave him a stern look, wondering how he dared to refuse. Unable to disobey His Majesty's order, the young man sat in Kale's vacated seat. Edwards felt very awkward, which could not be said about Daisy herself, who was clearly very enthusiastic. The girl had heard that he was a very good rider and asked him to teach her, as she had long wanted to try. Edwards replied that he would gladly teach her, but by law, women must learn horseback riding from female instructors. And since he was a man, he, unfortunately, would not be able to teach a lady. Instead, Kamar promised to recommend a very capable mentor to Daisy. The girl shyly averted her saddened gaze and thanked him. Suddenly, Edwards added that if she ever felt scared, she could come to him and he would stay by her side. And then Daisy's face once again broke into a happy smile. Looking at them, the Emperor told Kale that his sister and Edwards looked great together. Then he turned to the Count and asked how the matter he had entrusted to him was progressing. Kale replied that everything was going smoothly and without a hitch, so His Majesty could rest assured. Adrian was very pleased that people like the Count and Edwards were working for him. Meanwhile, Hector returned to the barracks to relieve the soldiers, as the load was too heavy and they were exhausted. He ordered the knights to eat, warm up, rest, and await further instructions. A fire had just been lit near the tents, and the butler had prepared hot food, having learned that they were working in such cold. Meanwhile, the Emperor told Edwards to take Daisy home, as it was already late, and he himself wanted to speak with Kale alone for a while longer. On the way, the girl asked Kamar if he liked her dress. And when the guy replied that it suited her very well, Daisy admitted that she had specially ordered it for their meeting. Edward's cheeks flushed with embarrassment, and he replied that it was an honor for him. Deciding to take the bull by the horns, the girl asked if he believed in love predetermined by fate. Hearing this question, Edward suddenly became thoughtful, and in his mind, the girl he had accidentally met on the street and helped retrieve her stolen satchel resurfaced. The young man smiled and replied that he didn't believe in love destined by fate. He thinks only of serving His Majesty, and he has never considered relationships with women. Daisy tried to explain to Edwards that he too would one day need to marry, but he interrupted her, informing her that they had already arrived. The girl fell silent and sadly lowered her head. Edward silently got out of the carriage, and she continued to sit, lost in thought. Realizing his mistake, the young man returned, offered her his hand, and asked her to get out. At that moment, the butler ran out of the house shouting that trouble had struck and there was a fire in the kitchen. Servants bustled around carrying buckets of water to put out the fire. As it turned out, the fire started in the kitchen, where they had recently been drying hay and firewood, and then it flared up even more and spread to the hall. Fearing for the money storage, Edwards asked if the fire had spread anywhere else. The other rooms were fine, but because it was dark outside, it was difficult to extinguish the fire. The butler sent a man to the palace to inform Count Kale about everything. Since the fire did not affect the warehouse, Edwards decided that there was no need to bother His Majesty, and he would only get angry about being disturbed over a trifle. Therefore, he declared that he would handle it himself and ordered the servant to be caught and brought back so that he would not bother the Count. None of them noticed someone watching the events from behind the bushes. Once they were sure everyone was distracted by the fire, these people quickly got to work and started moving the chests. When Kale returned, he was furious to learn that there had been a fire in the house and he hadn't been informed. Hector reported to the Count that the butler had sent a messenger to the palace, but Mr. Edwards and Lady Daisy sent him back. Kale was angry, as he considered this insolence and self-will because he should have been informed about such an important incident. He ordered Hector to find out the cause of the fire and report all the details to him by the time he returned. Just at that moment, Lord Wynard, Philip Colin, arrived at the Earl's estate. They hadn't seen each other for almost 10 years. After greeting him, Kale announced that he had volunteered to help with the transportation. He suggested setting off immediately and ordered Hector to give instructions to load the wagons. Letting Colin go first, Kale thought about what a fool this man was. After all, when bandits attacked them on the road and took all their money, he would have to solve the problem by allocating funds from his own pocket. It was already dawn when the delegation passed through the forest with help. Along the way, Philip could not hide his joy that His Majesty had shown concern for the victims. Kale was amazed at how naive this man was, as he had not a shred of doubt about the Emperor's intentions. Philip remembered how genuinely the two previous rulers had loved their people. The Lord had always considered the current emperor to be different, and was glad to learn that he had changed so much. Suddenly, the knight who was riding ahead galloped back with the message that there were about 20 armed bandits ahead. Mentally rejoicing that everything was going according to plan, Kale feigned surprise. He stated that he would try to distract the bandits with one crate, and advised Colin to grab the others and run. However, a moment later there was nowhere to retreat, as the squad was surrounded. Philip drew his sword, intending to stretch his muscles after a long break and protect the money. The Count tensed, as this old man could only needlessly provoke the bandits. Grabbing one of the crates and following the preliminary plan, Kale began to beg for their lives in exchange for money. The gang leader opened the chest with a smirk to check if it would be enough for them. However, when he opened the lid, he found only stones inside instead of gold. The bandit got angry because they had been promised that they could take a handful of what was inside, but now it turned out they had been deceived. Shouting that it was a trap, the leader ordered them all killed. Many knights were already lying wounded and dead on the ground, while Philip continued to defend the chests. The man was determined to deliver aid to the victims in Vinach no matter what, and fought desperately. Kale tried to stop all of this, because this attack was supposed to be pretend. No one listened to him, and the next moment, the Count froze in horror. Lord Colin was sitting on the ground, clutching his right forearm, and next to him lay his severed hand. With a loud cry, Kale rushed to save the old man and furiously killed the bandit who had attacked him. Philip asked the Count not to think about him, to grab the money and leave quickly. Kale didn't understand why, instead of a performance, there was a real massacre, and if Edwards had really betrayed them. Suddenly, he heard the approaching hoofbeats of horses and a shout that everyone must be taken alive at all costs. Deciding it was Edwards, Kale turned around but saw completely different people. Knights, led by Grand Duke Ryan Winthrop, galloped towards them. Dismounting their horses, they rushed into battle with the bandits. The defeated bandits grabbed several chests and fled, disappearing into the forest. Several criminals were still caught and taken prisoner. Ryan thought how good it was that they were observing from afar, because he didn't imagine that the bribed bandits would actually attack. The Duke ran up to Colin to ask if he was all right. Seeing the condition of the one-armed Count, he ordered Owen to immediately take him to the healer. Kale was interested in how Ryan knew exactly where to come. The Duke replied that he was very worried that he could not take care of the transportation that the Emperor had entrusted to him, and as soon as the rebellion was suppressed, he rushed to help. Rihanna, in turn, was interested in why they were so careless about security, because there might be more than one gang. Since there were many killed and wounded, the Duke decided that it would be better for them to receive treatment in Winard. He offered Kale to go there with his soldiers, but he refused. Ryan smiled and told him to do as he wished in that case. Mounting his horse, he ordered the arrested criminals to be taken to the capital. When the Duke and the knights left, Kale, horrified, wondered what he should do now and what to prove to His Majesty. Hector approached him, wanting to hear further instructions. According to the original plan, they were supposed to return to the palace from here, and Lord Colin would have gone to Winard empty-handed. Kale blamed Edwards for everything, who assured them that the bandits would only stage an attack, but they took the chests and attacked seriously. But since nothing could be changed, the Count mounted his horse to go to Winard and report the theft instead of Colin. Soon, a carriage with aid, accompanied by Duke Winthrop, wounded soldiers, and Count Kale, entered the territory of Winard. There, they were met by people exhausted from hunger and hardship. The second son of Lord Winard's family, Solid Colin, came out to meet the delegation. Kale was surprised that he was dressed in a sheriff's uniform. It turned out that to help the suffering residents a little and maintain order, Solid volunteered to serve as the head of the guard for several months. Kale smiled, calling him a strange man, and thinking that it was unbecoming for an aristocrat to engage in such an unworthy business. To begin with, the Count asked for a healer to be brought, as there were many wounded among the soldiers. He was about to report the theft of the money when Solid suddenly announced that they had already safely received help and suggested Kale check everything. When the man opened the chests, the Count could not believe his eyes, for they were full of gold. Kale didn't understand how the money, which was supposed to be taken by bandits and sent to the palace, ended up in Winard. The Emperor stood over the open chest, his face darker than a storm cloud. When his power of speech finally returned, he ordered Edwards to find out what had happened and left the room. The chests, which with the help of the escaped robber still made it to the palace, were filled with stones. Thanks to the aid, stability was restored in the Winard region, and the bandits, who attacked Kale and Colin's squad, were thrown into the dungeon. The Emperor was seething with anger over the failed plan, but outwardly expressed joy and praised Ryan for defeating the bandit gang. The next day, the prisoners were hanged without any interrogation, and no one ever found out why the plan failed. The heroine, who had already been released from house arrest, was preparing snacks for young Master Aaron. Suddenly, Evelyn entered the kitchen, and the girl tensed, trying to understand what she was up to this time. The woman apologized to Bella for that incident and suggested they just forget about everything. The heroine smiled and asked why Evelyn was telling her this, because it was much more important for her to be forgiven by the master. The woman noted that Bella held the highest position in the house after the butler and asked her to put in a good word for her, as she had come there to work as a nanny but ended up as a maid. The heroine perfectly understood that since Evelyn had started talking like that, she was already preparing to slowly begin her plan. Determined to find out what she was up to, no matter what, Bella promised to speak with the butler. Meanwhile, Aaron was in his math class, and the teacher gave him a problem about cats sitting in a room. According to the problem, there were 3 ginger cats and 2 gray ones, and we needed to calculate the probability that the cat that escaped through the window would be yellow. Without much thought, Aaron replied that the probability of this was 60%. The teacher was about to move on to the next problem, but the boy suddenly declared that the probability could also be 0 or 100%. The Duke, who was passing by the classroom at that moment, heard his son's words and became interested. He approached the door, silently opened it a crack, and began to eavesdrop on what Aaron was saying. The teacher was flustered and asked the young gentleman to explain what he meant. According to Aaron, since the door is closed, no one can know for sure whether the cat is out or not. This is a thought experiment conducted by a scientist named Schrödinger. Until you open the door, it's impossible to confirm whether the cat is there or not. The shocked teacher asked Aaron where he had heard such a thing, and the boy, laughing, replied that Bella had told him. At that very moment, the heroine, who had approached the door with snacks, asked the Duke why he was standing at the threshold and not entering the classroom. Turning angrily to the girl, Ryan asked her what she was even teaching his son. Not understanding why he was looking at her like that and feeling flustered, Bella replied that she had merely told him a few scientific facts in the form of stories. Looking at the girl with distrust, the Duke asked what this Schrödinger's cat was. But instead of Bella's answer, he heard Aaron say that this theory teaches not to jump to conclusions without checking the facts. It is especially important for those who govern the people to be careful in their own words and judgments. And although the heroine had not said anything of the sort to the boy, and he had drawn his own conclusions, Ryan now understood what it all meant. After that, he praised Bella for the excellent work she did helping the victims in Winard. The Duke offered the girl to choose a reward for herself, suggesting that she might ask for money or a vacation. In reality, what the heroine wanted most was for Ryan to survive, but it was unlikely that if she said it aloud, the wish would come true. Therefore, Bella replied that her true desire had no material value, and since she wasn't ready for such a question and hadn't even thought about a reward, she asked for time to think. The heroine was about to enter the classroom, but the Duke stopped her again. In addition to the main reward, he wanted to fulfill some small wish of hers right now. After a little thought, the girl replied that she probably did have such a wish. Bella heard that near the Duke's castle, there was a place like a magical fairy tale, and she would like to see it. Ryan smiled, understanding exactly what place she was talking about, and told the girl to get ready. With these words, he turned around and left, leaving the heroine in complete bewilderment. After some time, she was already ready and waiting for the Duke at the castle gates. Even though she came out at his command, all of this seemed somewhat surreal to the girl, as she hadn't been out anywhere for so long. When Ryan finally appeared, Bella was surprised that he had only brought one horse with him. But when he asked if she knew how to ride, the girl answered in the negative. Climbing onto the horse, the Duke declared that this was precisely why he had only brought one. When Ryan offered Bella his hand to help her up, she was so surprised that she froze in bewilderment. Tired of waiting, the man grabbed her by the waist and easily lifted her onto the horse. After seating Bella in the saddle behind him, he told her to hold on tight. This confused the heroine even more, as she couldn't understand what exactly she was supposed to hold on to. The horse started moving, and to avoid touching the Duke, the girl balanced herself with her hands in the air. When they finally arrived, the heroine couldn't take her eyes off the beauty that unfolded before her. At that moment, the heroine thought that this was exactly what a vacation must look like. In her past life, when everyone else went on vacation, she, being a freelancer, worked tirelessly. The girl did it for her family, and after work, she still had to go home and work on her manuscript. Because of all this, she always envied people who could afford to go on vacation. But now she could feel the gentle breeze, watch the beautiful clouds, and happiness filled her so much that she wished she could stop this moment. Glancing at the girl, Ryan thought she seemed to be enjoying the walk. At that very moment, the horse suddenly stumbled and reared up. Fearing a fall, the heroine gripped the Duke tightly and pressed herself against him. Judging by how the girl trembled, the Duke understood how frightened she was. And although her heart truly sank, Bella smiled and pretended everything was fine. And only at that moment did she suddenly realize that she had been sitting there, holding the Duke with both arms all this time. The girl immediately let go of him, apologized, and began to make excuses, saying that she hadn't grabbed him intentionally. Ryan replied that it was all right, and that she could continue to hold on to him like that. Bella decided that it would be awkward, and began to hold on to the back of the saddle. However, when the horse broke into a gallop, she changed her mind and decided to ask permission to grab onto the Duke again. Ryan agreed, and turning away from the girl, smiled imperceptibly. Soon they reached a spacious field dotted with dandelions. The Duke dismounted and offered the girl his hand to help her get off the horse. Spinning around the field, the heroine couldn't get enough of the beauty of this place. Bella was picking dandelions, whose fluff flew around like snowflakes. Turning to the Duke, she asked if it really looked like a snowfall. Ryan smiled and replied that it indeed looked beautiful. The girl was embarrassed that she allowed herself to express her emotions so openly in front of him and apologized. However, the Duke said that when they are outside the castle, she is not obliged to behave so formally and can be freer. To the question of what level of freedom he was referring to, Ryan replied that she could treat him as if he were a friend. Bella agreed and laughed, adding that he wouldn't be able to take his words back later. As she gathered dandelions, the heroine wondered if all this meant that the Duke trusted her more. She handed Ryan the bouquet, intending to show him something amazing. Then the girl blew on the dandelion heads, and the man was surrounded by flying fluff. After that, she made the Duke a dandelion wreath. Then she ran across the field, raising fluff into the air, which covered them from head to toe. And afterwards, they helped each other pull it out of their hair and wipe it off their faces. When the sun began to set below the horizon, Ryan and Bella sat down on a large rock and began to admire the sunset. The Duke was curious about the life the girl had lived before, but she replied that there was nothing remarkable about it. Nevertheless, Ryan stated that he couldn't judge how interesting a story was until he heard it. Bella warned in advance that the story was long and boring, and then began to tell it. Until then, her life had been entirely dedicated to money, as she had younger brothers to care for. She had to grow up early and understand what it was like for their mother, who worked tirelessly so that they would lack nothing. After all, her mother soon lost all her strength and health, so Bella had to drop out of school and start working to solve all the problems. But in the end, she fainted from overwork, as she lived only for her family and never thought about herself. Her younger siblings could also have found part-time jobs, and now Bella only regretted that she had dedicated all her time to work. The Duke didn't know what a part-time job was, but he was ready to give the girl a vacation to rest and meet her family if she needed it. She refused as she couldn't see them due to some circumstances, but advised Ryan to also rest from time to time, looking around. After all, when a person is healthy and rested, they are able to take care of others. And while Ryan was pondering her words, the girl suddenly grabbed him by the wrist. The man flinched, his breath seemed to stop, and he looked at Bella. She was admiring the incredibly beautiful romantic sunset and wanted him to share this feeling with her too. The heroine confessed that she was very happy and thanked the Duke for helping her fulfill her small wish. So they sat side by side in the middle of the field on a large stone, watching the last rays of the sun disappear beyond the horizon of the crimson sky. When darkness fell over the city, Edwards went to a meeting in one of the capital's alleys. He was surprised that Cale wanted to talk again, as it seemed to him that they had already discussed everything last time and agreed that the bandits had betrayed them because they were blinded by gold. In the Count's opinion, due to the chaos, they simply turned a blind eye to it. But the more he thought about it, the stranger everything seemed to him. Looking at him with a smirk, Edwards asked if he suspected him, the person the Emperor trusted most. But Cale suspected not him, but Ryan, believing that he had interfered and replaced the chest during the fire at the estate. Edwards wondered if he had investigated that fire well, because the Count initially claimed that it was not arson, but an accident. Kamar hired bandits, as planned, and the fact that Cale could not properly monitor the boxes was only his fault. The Count did not rule out that Edwards could have ordered the robbers to attack him because he was afraid of competition in proximity to His Majesty. Kamar was amused by his rich imagination, and he suggested that Cale go and tell everything to the Emperor. Considering this conversation completely useless, he turned around and went his own way. Ignoring Cale's threats, and without looking back, Edwards asked him not to contact him about this matter again. Getting up from the stone, Ryan turned to Bella, brushed her hair back, and told her that she was truly special. He admitted that he was very curious about what was going on in her head. The Duke would like to know if there is a place for him among the girl's thoughts. Then he gently stroked her face and reached his lips to hers. At that very moment, the heroine woke up from her sleep with a scream. She clutched her head, not understanding why she had dreamed of something like that. However, the thought that it was all just a dream still pleased the girl. After all, in real life, it couldn't be that she would fall in love with a character she herself created, even if it was Ryan. At the very same time, the Duke was also awake and standing by the window of his room. The man didn't understand why Bella's smile wouldn't leave his thoughts, but he didn't even know who she really was yet. Apparently, all of this was just because he had never seen such a bright smile before, and he was also overly excited about the walk after a long break. Both of them, each in their own bed, tried to force themselves to stop thinking about it and fall asleep quickly. The next day, His Majesty summoned the Duke. Enough time had passed since Ryan's return to the capital, but he still hadn't received any worthy assignments, and now, something important had happened that the Emperor could entrust to him. Adrian opened an office at the northwest gate of the Imperial Palace. There, the Duke was to receive people and assess public opinion. Noticing his brother's bewilderment, the Emperor asked if he had any objections to solving people's problems on his behalf. Ryan bowed and promised to live up to His Majesty's expectations. The northwest gate of the Imperial Palace was the dirtiest place, inhabited by beggars. Brothels and homeless people were scattered everywhere, and the environment was a breeding ground for all kinds of diseases. At least 2 or 3 corpses floated down the dirty river of this area every morning. And so, the Duke went to the office, which was located in a place everyone tried to avoid. Accompanied by Owen, he entered a dirty room, covered in dust and cobwebs, with only a table and 2 chairs in the middle. The adjutant pinched his nose from the unbearable stench and was outraged by the absolutely unsuitable working conditions. In his opinion, no matter how much the Duke was out of favor with the authorities, the Emperor should not have sent a man who had earned military glory to such a place. Ryan asked Owen to be more reserved and to keep his mouth shut while in the capital. He ordered people to be hired to clean up the place, and in addition, they needed to buy essential supplies. But Owen couldn't stop complaining. It was obvious to him that the Emperor had done all this out of spite, and no normal person would work in such a place. His fiery speech was interrupted by an old woman who entered and asked if she had come to the Civil Affairs office correctly. The woman heard that people were helped with their problems in this place. The Duke sat down at the table, and Owen carefully helped the old woman approach him. The woman recounted how she went to buy eggs, but the merchant, after taking the money, didn't give her the goods, and when she started to argue, he simply kicked her out. The old woman asked for help because she wanted to cook porridge for her granddaughter's birthday, and the Duke handed her an application form. After writing down everything he needed, he promised the woman he would do everything possible to make sure her granddaughter ate her favorite porridge today. It pained Owen to watch what the man who once commanded thousands upon thousands of soldiers on the battlefield now had to do. A few days later, a long line of people formed in front of the Civil Affairs office. People whispered that the Grand Duke solved all the problems of the populace, no matter how big or small. One of the men in line doubted whether His Grace would help find the missing set of clothes, and the second, in response, told how last week the gentleman rescued his cat from a tree. People patiently waited for their turn, and one by one went in to tell Ryan about their problems. A man with a black eye told how he was hit by a man in a black coat. The Duke asked him many clarifying questions and wrote everything down in a form. After sealing the letter, he ordered it to be taken to the police station, promising the victim that his case would be dealt with there. When that matter was settled, the Duke called for the next visitor. Suddenly hearing a familiar voice, Ryan looked up from his documents. Standing before him was a smiling Bella, who had brought the gentleman a snack for lunch. Returning to the mansion, the heroine breathed a sigh of relief as she had finally managed to deliver food to the Duke. She thought that at this rate, besides her duties as Aaron's nanny, she would also become Ryan's nanny. Passing by the gates, she suddenly heard some noise. Local residents were gathered outside, wanting to present His Grace with gifts from their gardens, bakeries, and anything else they could share as a token of gratitude. The bewildered guard tearfully asked Bella to help him, as he didn't have the authority to let them in. Deciding this was an excellent chance to show off her office worker skills, the girl smiled and asked everyone to follow her. In the evening after dinner, Alan noticed how tired the gentleman looked and advised him to go to bed early. But the Duke refused, as he still needed to review the reports on river pollution. When asked how Aaron was doing, the butler replied that he had nothing to worry about, as Bella was taking good care of the young master, and he himself was studying diligently. Ryan's attention was drawn to a folder with papers that Alan had left on the table. The butler told how townspeople had come to the estate during the day, wanting to express their gratitude to His Grace, and Bella prepared a document consisting of lists of who presented what exactly as a gift to the Duke. Thanks to this list, in case anything dangerous was found on the estate, an investigation could be easily conducted. Alan noted that Bella was quite meticulous in all matters concerning Ryan, and he couldn't help but agree with him. Flipping through the folder, the Duke noticed that such work definitely could not have been done by an ordinary nanny. These were lists compiled by someone who definitely had an education. So the Duke smiled and declared that from now on, when dealing with official matters, it might be useful to consult Bella from time to time. From early morning, servants bustled about the Grand Duke's castle, preparing for the Adrian festival. Alan called Bella and tasked her with preparing the food, paying special attention to rice cakes. Learning about the upcoming celebration, the heroine became very excited as she could see with her own eyes the festival she herself had conceived. Hundreds of years ago, the knight Adria led an army and set out to conquer monsters in the middle of winter. They endured harsh trials, defeated the monsters, and people organized a festival to honor their bravery. While ambushed, the knights satisfied their hunger with rice cakes, so this treat became traditional at the festival. The heroine didn't know how to make such cakes, but suddenly, she had a great idea. She informed Alan that Evelyn had dreamed of at least peeking into the kitchen after a long break, and suggested entrusting this task to her. The butler didn't care who exactly would do it. For him, it was more important not to disrupt the preparations for the festival. In reality, Bella wanted to give Evelyn a chance to show her true intentions this way, while she herself would carefully watch her to expose her. The heroine went in search of the woman and found her sweeping paths in the garden. Bella said that she had been watching her lately and noticed that Evelyn had been reflecting a lot on what she had done. So she persuaded the butler to entrust her with making rice cakes for the festival, and he approved of the idea. Evelyn fell to her knees before the girl and tearfully thanked her. Bella helped her up from her knees and wished the woman good luck with the cooking. Evelyn smiled slyly, a plan already forming in her mind. Upon entering the Kamar family residence, Edward saw his father and brother entertaining themselves with women of easy virtue in the hall. Not wanting to see any of it, the young man turned around and walked back. His older brother Theodore asked with a smirk why he was leaving so soon. Edwards replied that he still had some errands to run for His Majesty. Count Herbert Kamar was outraged that his youngest son didn't even greet him and Theodore. Trying to suppress his anger, Edwards bowed and replied that he simply didn't want to disturb them. Theodore wondered why his brother was behaving this way in front of the family, because he himself was well versed in pleasures, as there were rumors about how often he partied with women alongside the emperor. Edwards coldly replied that he was simply trying not to spoil His Majesty's mood. Theodore had no doubt about this, as he knew perfectly well that his brother was the emperor's loyal dog. But suddenly, his expression changed sharply, and he began to shout at Edwards. Theodore accused his brother of having so blackened their and their father's names in the emperor's eyes that the emperor constantly refused them an audience. But Edwards never said anything about his family in front of His Majesty. And yet, Theodore wasn't going to believe it. He was sure his brother was trying to become the next count by keeping him from meeting the emperor. Poking him in the chest with his finger, he advised him to come to his senses and not forget that he was just the bastard born of a prostitute. Not wanting to listen to any more of these insults, Edward swung and hit Theodore across the face with all his might. He was ready to endure anything except insults directed at his mother. Herbert rushed to his son's aid, indignant at how Edwards dared to hit him. The guy trembled even more with anger, because his father must have heard Theodore's words. But he yelled for Edwards to shut up immediately. He forbade him to utter a single word about that shameless woman, the disgrace of the Kamar family. Herbert yelled that Edwards was the same, because he inherited that base blood. In response, the guy smirked, suggesting that it was probably out of longing for his mother that his father decided to entertain himself with such women today. Looking him in the eyes, Edward suggested he ask his stepmother if she knew about it. Herbert called the guards and ordered them to beat that bastard to death. In just a moment, Edwards was surrounded by armed knights. The guy smiled and asked his father what he thought the emperor would do after losing his right-hand man. He doubted that the Kamar family would be able to bear the consequences of this. Herbert no longer wanted to tolerate the bastard's presence and ordered him to leave their estate. He didn't have to repeat himself, as Edwards calmly turned around and left the house that very second. Herbert was so angry he was ready to kill the bastard, but Theodore put his arms around his father's shoulders and asked him to calm down. He had planted a spy in the Grand Duke's residence who was supposed to kill Ryan during the festival, and after that, they would immediately gain His Majesty's trust. When Theodore spoke of this, he had no idea that his brother was still standing behind the door and heard his words. The next day, Edwards found the Emperor very agitated because of a letter he had received that morning from the treasurer. Ryan applied for urgent, large-scale road repairs and sewage system cleaning. Adrian was outraged because he had sent his brother to that dirty, impoverished hole so that he would know his place. And now he was demanding money like a wild dog. And although Edwards didn't understand why he shouldn't refuse the request, the Emperor replied that he wouldn't have approached him if it were that simple. He ordered his assistant to immediately go to the northwest gate and scout out the situation there. Taking another knight with him, Edward set off for the designated area. This place, which used to be mired in mud and swarming with beggars, had completely changed. Even the previously polluted river water was completely clear. And although Edward saw everything with his own eyes, he still couldn't believe it. His assistant didn't understand if this was good news or bad, and what they would need to report to His Majesty. Edwards asked the knight to be quiet for a moment and let him think. Suddenly, not far off, he noticed soldiers from Ryan's army and decided to follow them. Stopping near one of the buildings, the soldiers asked the manager to come out to them. On behalf of the Duke, they presented him with a warrant, according to which the establishment was to suspend its activities due to accusations of fraud. The man was outraged because this shop belonged to Mr. Theodore, the eldest son of Count Kamara. Meanwhile, Edwards was hiding around the corner and heard that they were talking about his brother's store, and that his brother, upon learning what had happened, would surely want to kill Ryan as soon as possible. He smiled, deciding to teach them a lesson so they could no longer report. Upon returning to the palace, Edwards reported that the situation in the Northwest District had significantly improved, and if money were allocated, even more improvements could be seen. Adrian couldn't understand why the hell Ryan was working so hard, as if he expected some kind of achievement prize from him. Edward suggested looking at it from another perspective, because more taxes could be collected from a developed area. However, the Emperor held a different opinion, believing that taxes could be collected in any case, and it was unlikely that Ryan was doing all this for that specific purpose. In any case, everything seemed very strange to Adrian. He had sent Ryan to that place to live there like a dead rat, and he wasn't going to tolerate his attempts to punch above his weight. Edwards was ready to hear His Majesty's command and proceed with its execution. And then, Adrian ordered him to go to the prison and free Chester. Edwards was taken aback, as it was about a ruthless killer who had murdered about 10 people. The Duke personally apprehended Chester during his stay at the border. This bastard was sure that Ryan had killed his wife and child, and definitely craved revenge. But that's exactly what Adrian wanted. He wanted Chester to deal with his brother, and promised to reward Edwards if he organized everything correctly. The assistant promised to carry out His Majesty's order, while at the same time thinking that everyone around was targeting Ryan. Evelyn went to the market, but on the way she turned into one of the narrow alleys. And although she looked around on her way, she never noticed that Bella had been following her the entire time. In the alley, Evelyn met a man in a cloak who handed her a small bottle. Just as Bella thought that the villainess had decided to add poison to the food again, someone suddenly touched her shoulder from behind. The girl flinched in fright, covered her mouth with her hand to keep from screaming, and, turning around, saw the guy who had helped her catch the thief last time. Evelyn heard a noise behind her and sharply turned around. Without losing her composure, Bella covered her face with her hands and pressed herself against the chest of the guy, who was stunned by her actions. So when Evelyn turned around, she didn't see anything strange, except for a couple hugging around the corner. Hearing that the person she was following had left, the heroine immediately pulled away from Edwards. The guy laughingly remarked that they weren't close enough for such hugs, and Bella apologized, explaining that she had no choice since he acted as if they knew each other. From her clothes, Edwards guessed that the girl worked as a nanny, and she confirmed his guess. The heroine was about to leave, but he suddenly stopped her and asked for at least her name. The girl wondered which of her 3 names would be best to give: Shinbora from her past life, Bella, or Vienna. She decided to give Edwards the most common name and introduced herself as Bella. Deciding that they had nothing more to discuss, the girl said goodbye. But Edwards again didn't let her leave and grabbed her wrist. He stated that he would walk her home, under the pretext that she was not from around here and might get lost. The heroine didn't know what to do, because in front of her was a villain, although, on the other hand, with his help she could learn something new about the Emperor. So she smiled and suggested they take a little walk together. During the walk, the heroine carefully examined Edward's face. It looked very masculine, but at the same time he seemed to be troubled by something. Bella asked the guy if something had happened to him and offered to share, believing she could help in some way. Edwards asked if she would listen to him if the story was about another person. He said that his boss ordered him to release a criminal from prison who had killed many people. Edwards wondered what she would do in his place, because on the one hand he could not disobey the order, and on the other hand he could endanger many lives. After a moment's thought, Bella suddenly replied that he should, of course, release the criminal, which greatly surprised Kamara. In her opinion, the taxes that go towards maintaining such a prisoner are a senseless waste. But the chief had only ordered Edwards to release him, not telling him exactly where he should be let go. So Edwards realized that this was indeed the right decision, because this way he could kill 2 birds with 1 stone. He was glad he had talked to Bella and thanked her for the excellent advice. In his mind, he was already imagining that the sea would surely be an even better solution, and a smile lit up his face. From the expression on his face, the heroine understood that he felt a great sense of relief, and although in the novel she had described him as a villain, it was now obvious that he committed evil deeds not of his own free will. Bella decided to ask Edwards why, being a decent person who thinks about others, he became the tyrant's right-hand man. The guy was literally taken aback by such a straightforward question. The heroine realized she had blurted out too much and apologized, hoping he wouldn't punish her for insulting the Emperor. But Edwards suddenly laughed and replied that he was just a bad person, that's all. Nevertheless, Bella disagreed with him, because if he were bad, he wouldn't have helped her for free at their first meeting. She wondered if he knew how mystical and captivating his presence was. Edwards laughed and asked if he could now claim his reward for the help, and Bella, also laughing, replied that she was taking back her recent words. But nevertheless, the girl was not going to change her opinion that he was kind. She promised to treat Edwards to a meal at their next meeting, and suggested they be frank with each other then. Only after this did Bella notice that it was already getting dark, and said that it was time for her to go. However, Edwards was not ready to let her go so soon, and rushed after her. And at that moment, someone suddenly called out to him from behind. It was his assistant, who had come to inform him that Edwards was urgently wanted by His Majesty. Kamar instantly saddled a second horse, but then seemed to hesitate. He watched Bella, unable to tear his eyes away from her receding silhouette. Finally, Edwards moved towards the castle, not noticing that there was another person in the square. Ryan stood, frowning and trying to understand what kind of situation he had just witnessed. By the time everything was settled, night had already fallen on the city. Edward's assistant didn't understand why he wasn't returning to the county to rest occasionally and keep his family from worrying. However, Kamar replied that he had no home with loved ones who worried about him. Noticing the sadness on the knight's face, he ordered him to wipe that expression off and instead think about business. Edwards asked if they had received any information from the spy they had sent to the Grand Duke's house. But the guy suddenly got nervous and confessed that the man had suddenly disappeared. After Duke Ryan's return to the capital, contact was unexpectedly lost. The knight had searched everywhere for him and was about to report it to Edwards as soon as there was any news. Kamar ordered an immediate search, because if the spy had been caught, it could lead to huge problems. The assistant apologized and promised to definitely find him. Edwards was going to use that man to warn Ryan about his brother, but given the circumstances, he needed to meet the Duke in person. At the same time, he had to act carefully so that the Emperor would not find out that he had visited the duchy. Meanwhile, Ryan, who had returned home, ran into Bella in the corridor. The girl was walking, smiling and humming some tune to herself. The Duke's thoughts were still occupied by the memory of how he had seen her with Edwards on the street. And if 2 people, completely unrelated to each other, were so close, it could only mean one thing. Ryan frowned, called out to Bella, and stopped her. The girl, as if nothing had happened, spoke to him with a smile. The Duke looked at her sternly and noted that Bella seemed to be in a very good mood. After that, he turned around and left, leaving her completely bewildered. The heroine didn't understand why he had left so abruptly, without finishing his sentence, and wondered if something bad had happened. The Duke was working in his study and summoned his adjutant. He instructed Owen to pick out some gifts for the people of his territory for the upcoming festival. The assistant was at a loss and admitted that he was completely inept at choosing gifts. Owen could easily command soldiers on the battlefield, but a task of this kind was completely beyond him. Suddenly, an idea came to the adjutant's mind to ask Bella for help. He had barely finished his thought when the Duke interrupted him, declaring that this girl could not be trusted. Owen was confused again, not understanding why Ryan had suddenly changed his mind so drastically. The heroine walked down the corridor, and her ears were burning as if someone was actively discussing her. She entered Aaron's room and offered him some dessert. The boy was very happy and promised to eat the cake as soon as he finished drawing. He showed his drawing of his father to the nanny. Aaron noticed that the Duke had been very tired lately and decided to give him his portrait as a gift. The boy suddenly became worried that his father wouldn't like the drawing, but Bella reassured him, convincing him otherwise. She explained to Aaron that the master loved him very much and would treasure this gift. The boy was delighted, and then suddenly asked what Bella herself was going to give the Duke. This question caught the girl off guard, as she didn't understand why she should give Ryan a gift. The boy explained that on this day, everyone usually gives gifts to those they like, and he thought Bella liked his father. And although the heroine, blushing to her ears, began to assure Aaron that there was nothing of the sort, the boy thought otherwise. He asked why, in that case, he and his father always smiled happily when they talked to each other. In Aaron's opinion, this meant that they liked each other, just as he himself liked Bella, because they also had fun spending time together. The heroine, embarrassed, tried to explain to the boy that it was completely different, but Aaron suddenly declared that everyone around thought Bella and his father were dating. The girl actually jumped in bewilderment, not understanding when such strange rumors had managed to spread. At night, the heroine tossed and turned in bed for a long time and couldn't fall asleep. She tried her best to convince herself that the gossip about her relationship with the Duke had absolutely nothing to do with it. Ryan was a character she had created, and there was no way she could fall in love with him. Bella squeezed her eyes shut, forcing herself to calm down and fall asleep. But for some reason, the moment when she and Ryan admired the dandelions in the field kept appearing before her eyes. Morning came, and the Duke was already in his study working, when there was a sudden knock at the door. Bella entered the room with a smile on her face, a tray in her hands. Ryan rudely asked where the maid who usually brings tea had gone, and why Bella was doing it. Since the Duke had been too rude and cold to her since yesterday, the girl horrifyingly concluded that rumors of their relationship might have reached him. At the same time, Ryan was thinking that, judging by how scared Bella was, she had clearly been sent by Edwards as a spy. The heroine needed to show herself as a professional nanny who wasn't bothered by gossip. So she told Ryan that she had something to tell him, but he said he was busy and suggested they talk later. However, Bella stated that it was urgent because, in her opinion, there was a spy in the residence. The Duke decided that the girl was testing him and decided to play along. Slamming the book shut, Ryan declared that it was nonsense and that he wasn't a fool to allow a spy to live in his residence. The heroine was completely confused, not understanding why he had suddenly become so cold. Perhaps he thought that she was spreading rumors about them, pursuing mercenary goals to gain social status or money. Therefore, Bella decided to ask him directly if he had any personal problems with her. She asked the Duke not to believe rumors, if any had reached him, as they were not connected to her in any way. Ryan was overcome with rage. He didn't care about any rumors, because he had seen everything with his own eyes. Completely unaware of what he could have possibly seen, the heroine declared that she had done nothing. The Duke became increasingly convinced that Bella was a well-trained spy, since she could remain so carefree even after he said he had seen her with Edwards. He stated that he had been mistaken about her, believing that she was not greedy and vain like others, but apparently, she had only offered friendship to gain his trust. Bella didn't understand. Was it just because she offered him friendship that he decided she wanted to be his equal? And if that was the case, she suggested to Ryan that they pretend this conversation never happened at all. Then the girl added that, in any case, she hoped for his trust in her, because her loyalty to him and to the young master is absolutely sincere. Ryan silently looked away from the girl. She, on the other hand, stared at him intently, clenching her fists in anger. And then, in the next moment, she suddenly dropped to her knees. In response to the Duke's bewilderment, Bella declared that since he didn't want to be her friend, she intended to speak her mind. Raising her head and looking directly into Ryan's eyes, the girl explained that she wanted to use the reward she had been granted. Since the Duke had promised to fulfill her every wish, she wanted him to believe her every word from now on. Ryan couldn't believe that Bella had actually decided to use her wish in such a way. And since the girl was unyielding, he clutched his head and allowed her to speak. The day of the Adria Festival celebration arrived, and many guests gathered in the hall. Bella brought a wren to the Duke as he was about to give him something. The boy enthusiastically handed his father a neatly wrapped gift. Inside was a framed portrait of Ryan with a caption that read that Dad protects the country and he will protect Dad. The Duke was very touched by the accuracy and love with which his son depicted him in the drawing. Wren explained that he had painted the picture and Bella had framed it, so the gift was made of both their hearts. Saying this, the boy winked with a sly smile at the bewildered Nanny. The girl was so embarrassed that she wished she could disappear at that moment. Ryan thanked his son and offered to hire a tutor for him if he liked to draw. Aaron liked the idea so much that his eyes sparkled with joy. Looking at the Duke, the heroine thought that although he still hadn't learned to show emotions, his praising skills had, nevertheless, noticeably improved. Suddenly, Ryan raised his head and looked directly at Bella. From his gaze, the girl became flustered and instantly blushed. The Duke immediately jumped up from the sofa, approached her, and asked if Bella had a fever as her face looked strange. The heroine tried to convince him that it was just hot in the room, but felt herself blush even more. Finally, the girl managed to calm herself down, and she handed Ryan her gift. Since he always forgot to wear a scarf in winter, she presented it to the Duke so he would take better care of himself. Ryan touched the scarf and felt its pleasant texture. At that moment, the butler entered and announced Mr. Edwards' visit. When the Duke ordered him to be admitted, the heroine flinched, as Edwards could not find out about her relationship with Ryan. And even more importantly, the Duke himself was not to know about her relationship with Edwards. Taking off his scarf, Ryan told Alan to take Aaron and invite Edwards in. He instructed Belle to stay, under the pretext that calling another servant would be too much trouble. As soon as Edwards entered the living room, he immediately praised the Duke for the beautiful decorations of the hall, which immediately created a festive atmosphere. Ryan introduced Kamara to their nanny Bella and asked her to serve tea to the guest, but as he sat down, he paid no attention to the girl. While the heroine was setting the table, the Duke asked Edwards the reason for his visit, assuming he had come on behalf of the Emperor. The guy smiled and replied that he doesn't always come just to deliver something from His Majesty. And at that very moment, he suddenly saw who was serving him tea. Not hiding his surprise, Edwards asked the girl how she ended up at the Duke's estate. The heroine flinched, but continued pouring tea and replied that the gentleman had mistaken her for someone else. Ryan decided to give them both a chance to confess on their own and asked if they knew each other. Shaking her head nervously, Bella hastily replied that they couldn't possibly know each other. Seeing how nervous she was, Edwards decided to follow her lead and, without hiding a smile, declared that he was seeing the girl for the first time. This seemed rather ambiguous to the Duke, as Kamar was certainly not trying to hide it. But at the same time, he was playing along with Bella. He again asked Edwards about the reason for his visit, and Edwards decided to speak directly. Kamar reported that his brother had sent a spy to the ducal castle, and therefore advised Ryan to be careful, as he did not want to read obituaries about his death after the festival. Bella was visibly surprised that he was talking about it so directly. The Duke himself also found it hard to believe that Edwards could tell him something like that. The guy smiled and replied that he just couldn't watch his brother kill a good man. But since this reason was not convincing enough for Ryan, Edwards decided to take his leave. When he stood up, his face suddenly became very serious, and he added that he was not joking at all. With these words, Edwards left the living room and departed from the Duke's castle. Once outside, he asked his assistant for the name of the spy his brother had sent here. How great was his surprise when the knight told him Bella's name. In the evening, on the day of the festival, Evelyn brought rice cakes to the Grand Duke. But since they were prepared by a maid whose trustworthiness had already been compromised once, Ryan ordered her to eat them first. Evelyn began to insist that she dared not touch food intended for her master. The Duke slammed his fist on the table and ordered the woman to be seized. Threatening Evelyn with a weapon, they ordered her to confess to the attempted assassination of His Highness. Ryan stared intently at the woman. Yesterday, during his conversation with Bella, the girl informed him that Evelyn was the enemy spy. She was sure that the spy was going to poison the rice cakes during the festival. Bella strongly urged him not to touch that treat and to arrest Evelyn. Furthermore, she confessed that she had been deceiving Ryan for some time, but she had her reasons for it. The girl revealed that her name was not Bella, and that she was the daughter of a rather wealthy family, but her father had tried to marry her off to an eccentric, rich old man, so she ran away from home. She was ready to admit who her father was, so that the Duke could find out the truth if he wished. But since she had to run away from home like that, she needed protection, and also a place where she could live. With the sharp blade of a sword at her throat, Evelyn screamed that she couldn't be arrested after hearing only one side, and began to accuse Bella of espionage. However, after Bella's testimony, the Duke ordered the butler to search both their rooms. As a result of the search, a poisonous powder was found in Evelyn's room, which proved her criminal plans. The woman's face immediately changed from indignation to hatred. The Duke ordered her to be removed at once, and the knights took the criminal by the arms. When they left, the heroine breathed a sigh of relief. But Ryan suddenly turned to her and asked why she pretended not to know Kamar if he knew for sure that it wasn't true. Then the heroine told the Duke how she had been robbed when she ran away from home, and how Edwards had saved her. The fact that the man helped her surprised Ryan. Bella added that at the time she didn't know who he was exactly, but in any case, the Duke had nothing to worry about, as they weren't close to Edwards or anything like that. However, it seemed to Ryan that from Kamara's perspective, things looked different. And although the heroine didn't understand what exactly he meant, the Duke didn't explain anything. Bella smiled and declared that it was now His Grace's turn to answer her question. She wanted to know if he would be friends with her now. Ryan smiled and replied that it was so, and they were still friends. The heroine stated that she had no doubt in her ability to understand people, and that he was a good person. Suddenly, a strange sound was heard from behind, and the Duke instantly jumped to his feet. The next second, a dagger flew towards them, but Ryan managed to grab Bella and save her from injury. He covered the girl with his body, but then an assassin attacked him from behind, holding a sword at the ready. The Duke pushed Bella away and ordered her to run. He himself drew his sword from its scabbard and rushed to fight the masked mercenary. At first, the heroine was stunned, not understanding how all of this could have happened. But then, she pulled herself together and ran as fast as she could towards the estate. Bella remembered that she should have some explosives left in her room, which she made when she was under house arrest. Soon she found the right bag, and all that remained was to connect the components. The girl decided to do it right on the run, and everything would have worked out. Ryan just needed to hold on a little longer. Meanwhile, during the fight, the Duke, judging by his opponent's skills, was able to understand who he was dealing with. With a deft movement of the tip of his sword across his face, he cut the criminal's mask. As the Duke expected, it was Chester, who smirked at the long-awaited meeting. He wanted to know if Ryan wasn't satisfied with his arrest, since he killed his wife and child after that. Chester was determined to exact revenge, and once again rushed into battle. Defending himself, the Duke cried out that he had nothing to do with it, as his wife had thrown herself off the cliff with their child in her arms. But Chester was sure that if Ryan hadn't pursued his wife and cornered her, she wouldn't have done it. At that moment, Bella ran up to them and shouted for the Duke to move aside. Ryan repeated again for her to run away, confident that knights would soon arrive to help anyway. But the girl promised to protect him and was not going to back down. Bella confessed that she was even ready to sacrifice her own life for him. Hearing these words, Chester's eyes flared with even greater madness. He declared that he would kill Ryan's woman, since he had killed his wife, and lunged towards Bella. The heroine tried to light the match as quickly as possible, but for some reason it wouldn't ignite. Bella froze as she saw the glint of Chester's sword, pointed directly at her. In the next moment, Ryan stepped between her and the killer, and blood splattered everywhere. Chester, maddened by the thirst for revenge, raised his sword to deliver a crushing blow. And at that moment, the match in Bella's hands finally lit up. Holding the wounded Duke with one hand, the girl threw a bomb towards the criminal with the other. Flames engulfed the man, and Ryan lunged at him with a sword. By the time the late knights ran to the scene, he had already struck the enemy. Breathing with difficulty, the Duke ordered Owen to seize the scoundrel so he wouldn't escape. Bella, with tears in her eyes, rushed to Ryan and suggested calling a doctor immediately. The Duke reached into the inner pocket of his jacket and pulled out the painting Aaron had given him. And although the glass was broken, the painting helped to absorb the impact of the weapon. Bella laughed because it turned out that the young master, as he promised in the drawing's caption, had protected his father. The girl helped Ryan up as he was still injured, and he, leaning on her shoulder, smiled at her. But suddenly the Duke coughed, and blood gushed from his mouth. His body went limp, and the heroine, in horror, began to call for help. In the morning, Ryan was woken up by sunlight hitting him directly in the face. His whole body ached, his head hurt, and though with difficulty, he still managed to sit up in bed. Turning around, Ryan saw Bella sleeping next to him, sitting on the floor by his bed. At that moment, he felt his heart suddenly beat faster. The Duke remembered how last night this girl was ready to sacrifice herself for him. Ryan gently touched Bella's face, realizing that he seemed to like her. The girl woke up from his touch and began to rub her eyes. Fully awake, she jumped for joy, seeing that her master had come to his senses after his fever had not subsided all night. Bella immediately began fussing, offering him soup, milk, or water. She bombarded him with questions about how he was feeling and placed her hand on his forehead to check his temperature. Assured that he didn't have a fever, the girl decided to bring him some warm water. She was already at the door when Ryan regained his speech and stopped her. Bella asked if he wanted her to bring him something else, but Ryan suddenly said that he heard her call his name before he lost consciousness. The smile froze on the heroine's face, and for a while she didn't know what to answer. When he coughed up blood, she really, in a fit of emotion, shouted his name. Finally pulling herself together, Bella apologized, excusing herself by saying she was too worried about him and promising that it wouldn't happen again in the future. However, Ryan interrupted her, stating that it sounded nice, and turned away, feeling how much he had blushed. The heroine was so surprised to hear something like that she asked him again. Nervously clenching his fist, the Duke suggested that she always address him by his first name from now on. He reminded her that she herself had called them friends, and friends usually call each other by their first names. The heroine smiled and agreed, calling him Ryan once again. Since the atmosphere had lightened, the Duke asked Bella to bring him some rice cakes, if there were any left. And although the girl had assumed that everything related to the festival would be a nightmare for him, she was glad to know that it wasn't, and went to get the treat. Left alone, Ryan thought that this festival had indeed been like a dream for him. As soon as Owen learned that the Duke had come too, he immediately entered his room. After making sure that his grace was all right, he apologized in advance as he urgently needed to report something about Chester. Owen sent a scout to the prison where the criminal was being held. He found out that Chester didn't escape, but someone intentionally let him out. The assistant hadn't even had time to name that person when Ryan interrupted him and named Edward's Kamara himself. However, the Duke believed that he didn't have the guts to do something like that of his own free will, and it was clearly an order from the Emperor. When Owen asked what Ryan was going to do, he smiled and replied that it was time to take action. A meeting was held in the Imperial Palace, attended by His Majesty's close associates. Theodore Kamar hastened to announce the joyful news that he had sent a spy into the house of the Grand Duke, who had killed Ryan. After the festival, the Duke did not appear outside his own estate for a long time. In Theodore's opinion, everyone is probably keeping quiet about it for now, as Ryan died unexpectedly, without having time to announce an heir. The Emperor asked Edwards if this was true, and he only confirmed that the Duke had indeed not appeared in the northwestern region lately. At that very moment, everyone present flinched, hearing Ryan's voice. Upon entering the negotiation hall, the Duke noted that he was very glad to hear that they had been worried about him. Ryan stated that he had been a little busy because a mercenary had broken into his castle, but fortunately, he was able to deal with everything. The Emperor was speechless with amazement, while Edwards, meanwhile, could not hide a smile. Theodore couldn't believe the Duke was all right, and he even jumped up and down. Ryan ordered the knights to enter, and they led the arrested Evelyn into the hall. Turning to Theodore, the Duke declared that he knew how he had given her the poison and ordered her to poison him during the festival. Kamar began to claim that he did not know this woman and ordered her to be removed, indignant at how Ryan dared to bring such a person to the Emperor. But Evelyn, bursting into tears, reminded Theodore how he had promised to protect her. Kamar, nevertheless, continued to insist that he was not involved in this and that the woman was simply trying to survive, so she was clinging to the only person she knew in this hall. Ryan replied that they could find all this out later, after conducting an investigation, and then announced that he had brought everyone a gift. Those present expected to see money or treasures in the box he placed on the table, but the Duke threw back the lid and pulled out the head of Chester, who had been hired to kill him. A commotion began in the hall. Some were petrified with horror, some felt ill, and some tried to understand how the criminal, who had been in prison, ended up decapitated. Edwards was the most surprised of all, as he had personally thrown the scoundrel into the middle of the sea. With a smirk, looking directly at him, Ryan stated that he was no less surprised than others that the sitting assassin had ended up in his house and tried to kill him. The Emperor suggested that the Duke stop all this and leave, promising to find out from the jailers how it happened. Ryan replied that he would do so, since His Majesty wished it. When the Duke and his retinue had departed, the Emperor gave vent to his emotions, indignant at how the boy, who should have already been killed, suddenly appeared before them safe and sound. Trembling with fear, the courtiers begged him to calm down, and while Adrian was thinking about how he would one day bring that bastard to his knees and make him regret ever being born, Ryan, with a smug look, left the palace. Night fell upon the city, and in an alleyway of one of the streets, a woman lay on the ground. Evelyn opened her eyes and, to her horror, found herself lying in a puddle of mud. The next day, Edwards reported to the Emperor that he had completed the assignment and killed all the jailers, and the Emperor ordered him to make sure there was no evidence left. In addition, Adrian asked about the progress of the tax collection for his birthday. Edwards hastened to assure him that everything was under control and that this year the process was going even better than before. Since everyone was expected to attend the celebration with partners, the Emperor asked about his progress with Kale's sister. Edwards lowered his head and confessed that he already had a woman in his heart. And although His Majesty was very surprised, he assured him that he was not joking at all. The unexpected news amused the Emperor, and he suggested that Edwards bring this girl to the event. Meanwhile, the Duke also received an invitation to the Imperial Ball, and it stated that he needed to attend with a partner. Ryan smiled, because this time, he had someone to go to this event with. Bella was at the market buying apples, when suddenly someone called out to her. The girl turned around and saw a breathless Edwards running towards her. He had specifically come here hoping to find Bella, to invite her over for a short while and tell her something there. However, the girl still had a lot to do, and it was time for her to go back. Edwards continued to insist, assuring her that it wouldn't take long. Remembering that she owed him a favor, the heroine decided to agree as a thank you for his help. When the girl accepted his offer, a happy smile shone on Edward's face. At the same time, Owen walked by and noticed Kamar and Bella heading somewhere together. He was surprised, wondering since when these two knew each other. Entering Edward's house and sitting in the living room, the heroine eagerly asked what he wanted to talk to her about. Kamar called a servant and ordered them to bring the gift. When Bella opened the box that was brought to her, she found a beautiful evening gown inside. Edwards asked the girl to accept the gift and accompany him to the Imperial Ball. He asked for her help because the Emperor was trying to set him up with another woman, but he didn't like her. The heroine, of course, understood the situation, but at that ball, she might run into her father, Count Tangeron. So Bella closed the box with the dress, apologized, and replied that she could not fulfill this request, and since it was already late, she stood up to return to the ducal castle. Suddenly, Edwards, whose face had changed, declared that as his spy in the ducal house, she must obey his orders. When the adjutant entered Ryan's room, he found him examining a woman's ball gown. Owen noted that it would be perfect for Bella, certain that the Duke wouldn't have prepared a dress for anyone else. As the sun was already setting, Ryan wondered why the girl hadn't returned yet. And then Owen informed him that he had seen Bella leave the castle with Edwards earlier that day. Hearing this, Ryan rushed out of the room, believing the girl might be in danger. The heroine felt as if dark clouds were gathering over her. She couldn't comprehend how Edwards could have planted Bella in the Duke's house as a spy. Kamar sent a man to give her the code, but there was no reply, and he decided that the girl had failed her mission because she had developed feelings for Ryan. Deciding that they needed to clear things up, Bella asked him to calm down and listen to her. But Edwards didn't want to hear any explanations and ordered her to return and work for him at the castle. At that very moment, a man's voice ordered him to immediately release the girl's hand. Ryan stood in the doorway, his face contorted with anger. When the Duke arrived at Kamar's, his assistant was about to enter first to warn his boss as he had a guest. But as soon as the door opened slightly, Ryan saw Edwards grab the frightened Bella and speak to her roughly. He managed to hear his words about the girl returning to work in his castle. Without waiting for an invitation, the Duke burst into the room and ordered Edwards to release her. After that, Ryan asked what his words meant and why Kamar was giving orders to someone who worked for him. Edwards noted that it was quite rude of the Duke to burst into someone else's home like that, and to conduct an interrogation besides. However, the heroine interrupted him and stated that there had been a misunderstanding, which apparently needed to be clarified. The girl explained that due to the circumstances, she had to make a deal with Bella and borrow her identity. Therefore, if Edwards needed to find the real Bella, she advised him to look for her in her hometown. With these words, the heroine apologized and, taking the Duke's arm, said goodbye and headed for the exit. Since Ryan knew that she was actually Vienna, there were no problems with him, but Edward seemed to genuinely mistake her for Bella. She just couldn't understand why he suddenly needed that girl. And then the Duke said that she was his spy. Apparently, Edwards, who was not nicknamed the Emperor's dog for nothing, carried out his order in this way. Ryan warned the heroine that Kamar was one of the most dangerous people in the world and advised her not to cross paths with him again, or even to pretend that they didn't know each other at all. On the outside, Edwards may seem like a decent person, but it's unknown what this ruthless man is really like. He always indiscriminately carried out the Emperor's orders, and the blood of many innocent people is on his hands. Later, returning to the estate, the heroine pondered what Edwards was really like. She didn't understand if the sides of him he had shown her until now were just a pretense. Bella entered the young master's room to call him to the table, but the boy didn't even turn around as he was sitting by the window, mesmerized by the colorful fireworks. The heroine remembered that it was the last day of the festival. She was overcome with a passionate desire to let Aaron enjoy the celebration while he was still young. However, her enthusiasm quickly vanished as soon as she wondered if the Duke would give his permission, since she had put him in a bad mood. Nevertheless, the girl managed to carry out her plan, and after a while, she and Aaron were in the square. The boy was incredibly delighted, as it was the first time in his life he had seen so many people. As she walked through the fairgrounds, Bella mentally asked the Duke and the butler for forgiveness for having to deceive them. Suddenly, Aaron saw something, and grabbing his nanny's hand, he dragged her to one of the stalls. Lizards on sticks were being sold there, and the boy really wanted to try them. The young master hadn't brought any money with him and asked Bella, and however much the girl wanted to refuse him, she couldn't deny him the pleasure. So she bought one lizard, fastidiously refusing to take this dubious treat for herself. Aaron, however, was happily devouring the snack. He offered Bella a piece too, and she, not wanting to upset the boy, tried it anyway. Only after taking a bite did the heroine suddenly realize that it wasn't a real lizard at all. Aaron laughed when he realized that Bella had mistaken the fried fish in batter for a real amphibian. Moving away from the lizard stall, the boy and his nanny looked with surprise at a huge spit. Then they headed towards a small house made entirely of cookies. Their attention was drawn by a shooting gallery worker who was inviting passersby to play a game and win a prize. The heroine noticed that Aaron couldn't take his eyes off a cute teddy bear lying on the counter. Bella was determined to win this toy for the young master and, rolling up her sleeves, asked about the game's rules. The girl had to pop at least 5 balloons with a dart. Bella was ready to show Aaron her dart-playing skills, and with the very first attempt, she popped the first balloon. The boy became incredibly excited and enthusiastically cheered on his nanny. And although the girl missed the next 2 times, Aaron kept insisting that she would succeed. However, the third dart flew to the same spot as the previous 2. Belle found this very strange, and she asked the shop owner why all the darts were hitting the same place. The man shrugged, claiming that the lady herself had aimed precisely there. The heroine realized that this man was a swindler, and that's why the prize shelf was still overflowing. The girl expressed her indignation to the man for daring to deceive people on such a festive day. In response, the stall owner offered her 3 more tries and then to clear the line for the next customers. But suddenly, out of nowhere, the Duke appeared and declared that he would throw the remaining 3 darts. Pulling a dagger from his pocket, Ryan said that the reason the darts stick together is quite simple. Some special force attracts them to each other and gathers them in one specific place, and this force is called magnetism. With these words, the Duke easily attached one of the darts to the tip of his dagger. Convinced of her suspicions, Bella no longer held back her words and now boldly declared the shop owner a swindler. In his defense, the man shouted that there was no law that forbade him from doing so, and it was his right to decide whether to attach a magnet there or not. The Duke smirked and declared that, in that case, it was his right to decide exactly how to throw the dart. With these words, he threw it backward with such force that it not only burst the balloon, but also broke through the wall. Watching Ryan throw darts one after another, the swindler clutched his head and began to beg him to stop. The Duke noted that, despite the tent being temporary, it looked quite flimsy. It could collapse at any moment and someone could get hurt. So before setting up his business, the man should have undergone a safety inspection. The swindler fell to his knees, handed the young master the desired toy, and began to beg to be let go this time. Bella took the bear from him, handed it to Aaron, and advised the man, after fixing the tent, to conduct his business honestly. Then, taking the boy by the hand and a surprised Ryan by the wrist, she smiled and led them away. The Duke decided that by the next festival, undercover officers would need to be deployed at the fair to identify swindlers. After that, he turned to Bella and asked why Aaron, who had gone to bed after dinner, was suddenly in the square. The heroine smiled foolishly, trying to buy time and come up with a decent excuse. But suddenly Aaron stood up for the girl. He took full responsibility, apologized to his father, and boldly offered to be punished. The stunned Duke asked his son not to run away alone next time, and to ask for permission first. The boy apologized and admitted that he was simply afraid that his father would not let him go. Then Ryan explained to Aaron that besides education, it is also important to gain experience in life. You can study every day, but the Andrea Festival only happens once a year. The Duke planned to take his son there when he was old enough not to be scared. Stroking his son's head, Ryan concluded that this day had obviously come sooner than he expected. The boy promised his father that the next time he wanted to go somewhere, he would definitely ask for his permission. After some time, Aaron couldn't stop admiring Bella, who managed to win every fairground contest. Without a hint of embarrassment, the girl replied that she was born talented and advised the young master to definitely take her with him again next year. Suddenly, the heroine noticed a strange shadow nearby and flinched. The Duke turned around to see what had attracted the girl's attention so much. 3 homeless children, dressed in rags, stood before them. Seeing them, Aaron, who was sitting in his father's arms, asked to be put down. The boy walked up to the children and offered them the prizes Bella had won for him as a gift. The children exchanged glances and, silently grabbing everything he had, ran away. The heroine asked Aaron if he was sad about the teddy bear he liked so much. However, the boy smiled and replied that he already had a teddy bear at home, and that was enough for him. And at that moment, the whole neighborhood was once again deafened by the explosion of fireworks. Bella whispered in the Duke's ear to quickly get into a comfortable position for her to climb on him. Ryan, though surprised, fulfilled her request, and the girl, blushing with embarrassment, began to explain that it wasn't for her. The Duke picked up his son, placed him on his shoulders, and now Eren could watch the fireworks even closer. The boy was happy and exclaimed that this was truly the best day of his life. On the way home, when Eren was already asleep in his father's arms, Bella said she was happy to see the young master so joyful. And although the Duke replied that it was all thanks to her, in the girl's opinion, it was his merit, as he allowed his son to attend the celebration. When they approached the castle, a woman with long, bright pink hair was standing at the gate. The heroine asked the Duke who it was, but he stood as if rooted to the spot, unable to utter a word. The woman turned around and silently looked at Ryan. The man's face became grim, and he angrily asked why she had come. Since the Duke addressed her by the name Renice, the heroine realized that the biological mother of Aaron stood before them. In the morning, when Aaron came into the dining room, his father and an unfamiliar woman were already waiting for him there, and she immediately jumped up to meet him. Renice rushed to hug the surprised boy, repeating endlessly how much she had missed him. When Aaron asked the woman who she was, she replied that she was his mother. The boy looked questioningly at his father, who was silently sitting at the table, to confirm if it was true. In response, Ryan only nodded silently. Bella watched what was happening from the side, and it all seemed very strange to her. She didn't understand the reason for Renese's sudden return to the Duke's castle. In the original story, this woman was a bad mother who abandoned her child. While Aaron suffered and harbored a desire for revenge against the Emperor in his heart, she never once appeared in his life. Suddenly, the boy declared that he didn't want breakfast, turned away, and ran off. Renesmee asked him to stop and at least eat some of his favorite chicken soup, which she had made for him. She told him how she had personally prepared it on their son's first birthday, and how happy she had been then, because Aaron had liked it. Bella frowned, not understanding why Renesmee was forcing the child to eat, even though he said he wasn't hungry. She picked up the boy and, apologizing, said that there was no need to force the young master to eat breakfast. He's only a 5-year-old child, and it's already hard enough for him to accept the fact that his mother suddenly returned. But Aaron suddenly tugged at Bella's sleeve and said he could eat that soup. He thanked the nanny and assured her that he was already fine. The heroine sat the boy at the table and served him a plate, while the parents sat opposite. Aaron tried one spoonful, smiled, and said the soup was very tasty. Renice was over the moon with happiness, while Bella, standing a little distance away, watched the scene with bewilderment. Then the girl went out into the hallway, thinking that the woman might indeed have returned because she missed her son. On the way, she bumped into the butler. The heroine didn't know the reason for the Duke's divorce from his wife because she hadn't written it into her novel, so she decided to ask Alan about it. She asked the butler to explain exactly what had happened between his master and his ex-wife. At first, the man clutched his head, not wanting to discuss the topic, but since Renee had returned, he decided it was better for Belle to know the whole truth. The family of Count Avery, Renice's father, was one of the 3 influential Count families, along with the Tangerine and Lunas families. The Duke took the girl as his wife by arrangement of His Majesty the Emperor. It was a marriage without love, but the couple had a son, Aaron, and everyone thought their married life was relatively smooth. When the young lord was only 2 years old, a very shocking incident occurred. The Duke accidentally witnessed his wife secretly sending a letter somewhere. It turned out that Renice was a spy who reported Ryan's every move to the Emperor. Upon learning the truth, the Lord shuddered with a feeling of betrayal, forced his wife to sign divorce papers, and drove her out of the house. After that, he went to the Emperor to make him confess everything, but achieved nothing. Since the Emperor's plan had failed, the Avery family fell out of favor with His Majesty and gradually lost their earldom. The butler heard rumors that they now lived a quiet and inconspicuous life in the borderlands. Alan advised Bella not to worry, confident that the Duke surely had a plan, and he hadn't allowed Renisa into the estate just for Aaron's sake. Left alone in the corridor, the heroine paced thoughtfully, pondering what she had learned. Belle felt incredibly sorry for Ryan, and now a lot of things fell into place. She realized why the Duke had such a bitter expression on his face that time he suspected her of espionage. Suddenly, it occurred to the girl that Renese's return might again be connected to the Emperor. Since Adrian couldn't manage to kill the Duke, he might have used his ex-wife for that purpose. As Renesmee came out of her room at that very moment, the heroine decided this might be her chance to find everything out. She stealthily crept into the guest bedroom to search it. However, no matter where Bella looked, she found nothing suspicious anywhere. Just as the girl remembered she hadn't looked under the blanket, Renesmee unexpectedly returned to the room. Bella froze in fear, and the woman, surprised, asked her to explain what she was doing in her bedroom. To get out of the situation, the heroine pretended that she was tidying up the room. Renesmee stood silently, arms crossed over her chest, looking at Bella with distrust. After a short silence, she asked the girl what her name was. After that, she stated that she appreciated Bella's concern, but preferred to clean her room herself. Then Renesmee insistently asked that from now on, the girl not enter her bedroom without permission. Bella apologized, and the woman advised her to return to her work. Leaving the room, the heroine couldn't believe that Renesmee, having caught her red-handed, had simply let her go like that. She was sure the woman would attack her with accusations and was even ready to be slapped. Bella had already stepped into the hallway when Renesmee suddenly stopped her and asked her to fulfill one request. She needed the girl to prepare hot sandwiches and drinks, put everything into a picnic basket, and bring it to the training ground once the snow stopped falling. Thanking Bella in advance for her help, she disappeared into her room. When she left, the heroine stood in thought for a while longer. After all, it was possible that Renesmee, like Edwards, had her own story, and in reality, she wasn't a bad person. Bella prepared everything she needed, took a basket, and headed to the training ground. Renesmee and her son were already sitting there on the lawn, and seeing the girl, they waved to her to show her where to go. The boy was happy to see the nanny and greeted her joyfully. Renesmee asked the girl to place the food on the blanket and then leave. She explained to her son that she had asked for a warm snack to be prepared for him to have during his break between training sessions so he could warm up. Aaron took a sandwich from the basket and offered Bella to have lunch with them. The heroine refused, citing that she needed to return to her duties. Suddenly, the Duke approached them to ask what they were doing in the sacred training ground, and around his neck was a scarf given to him by Bella. Aaron was happy to see his father, but before he could answer his question, Renesmee spoke. She apologized to Ryan and explained that it was cold outside and she wanted her son to warm up a bit. The Duke glanced at Bella and noticed that she was dressed too lightly for such weather. He told her to give him a cup of tea as well and then return to the house. Bella had barely opened the basket when Renesmee snatched it from her hands and poured Ryan some tea herself. After that, she asked Aaron if he liked the sandwich and offered him another one. However, the Duke forbade the boy from eating if he planned to continue training. Renesmee tried to persuade him to at least have half a sandwich, but Ryan was adamant. While they were arguing, the heroine quietly returned to the house. Finally, Renesmee admitted her defeat, and then remarked that Ryan looked very good in his scarf. Aaron told her that Bella had knitted the scarf for his father. The woman smiled, stroked her son's head, and remarked that this girl was obviously very talented. Ryan's gloomy face suddenly broke into a smile, and he said that Bella was not just talented, but also kind, clever, and had even saved his life. A flicker of anger crossed Renice's eyes, but she said nothing. Then the woman decided to change the subject, and complained that it had become too cold. She asked Ryan to lend her his scarf for a short while. The Duke called Owen and asked him to bring a blanket for the lady. After finishing his tea, Ryan returned to the house, took off his scarf, and hung it on the hanger. After some time, he discovered the scarf lying on the floor. When the Duke bent down to pick it up, he noticed a small hole in it. Ryan immediately gave the scarf a quick once-over, and fortunately, there was only one hole. However, it was completely unclear how exactly it had gotten there. The Emperor greeted his guest and asked Edwards to make sure no rat had followed her on the way to the palace. The woman assured His Majesty that he had nothing to worry about. Renesmee had made sure all the way that no one was on her tail. For caution's sake, she not only changed carriages but also changed her clothes. The Emperor laughed, for this woman was truly her father's daughter, just as scrupulous in everything. Then he suggested getting down to business and asked if Renesmee had managed to discover Ryan's weakness. When she answered in the affirmative, the Emperor was pleasantly surprised by the speed of the task's completion. Adrian was eager to know what exactly his brother's weakness was, and then Renesmee stated that Ryan had a beloved woman. Hearing this, Edwards flinched. However, the Emperor refused to believe that this emotionless block of wood was capable of feelings, so he asked Renesmee not to talk nonsense. But the woman continued to insist, noting that the Duke's tastes were quite unusual. According to her, Ryan had fallen in love with Aaron's nanny, Bella. Adrian decided to double-check if that bastard had truly fallen in love with a commoner, and Renice confirmed it again. Having received the necessary information, the Emperor told the woman she could leave and instructed her to wait, promising to contact her soon. As Renice left the audience chamber, she noticed Count Tangaron in the corridor. The woman pulled her veil tighter over her face so he wouldn't recognize her. This man severed all ties with her family as soon as she became His Majesty's informant. Renice pressed her lips together in anger, mentally vowing to definitely set everything straight. Tangaron was already going in to see the Emperor, when suddenly Edwards literally flew out from behind the door and knocked him down. He caught up with Renice, grabbed her arm, and silently dragged her along. Edwards led the bewildered woman into a room where they wouldn't be disturbed and pinned her against the wall. When she asked what was wrong, he yelled that because of her foul mouth, Bella was now in danger. Edwards wanted to know how she intended to take responsibility for her own words. Renesmee didn't understand why all the men around her were going crazy over this commoner, and what was so special about her. Smiling, she asked Edwards if he knew that girl, and although Kamar didn't give her a clear affirmative answer, it was all clear from his face. Renesmee apologized, saying she hadn't known about it, but there was nothing she could do now, as the damage had already been done, and if she's ordered to break Bella's arm, she'll do it, and if she's ordered to kill, she'll carry that out too. Looking directly into Edward's eyes, the woman added that he, more than anyone, surely knew this feeling. After all, he knew perfectly well what happened to those who challenged the Emperor. But if Edwards was so worried, she knew a way out of the situation. Rosine advised him to convince Bella to work in his castle, as this girl was hindering her plans. She told how she caught the nanny rummaging in her room and promised to reward Edwards if he got her out of the way. Rosine was just thinking about how to create a scandal and get Bella out of the ducal castle, so Edwards better take this girl before she ends her days on the streets. When Kamar returned to the Emperor, he asked where he had run off to so hastily. The guy replied that he urgently needed to visit the restroom. Then Adrian asked how Edwards was going to use Bella to destroy Ryan. The guy flinched, nervously clenched his fists, but then composed himself and pulled himself together. He told His Majesty that not much time had passed since Rosine returned to the Duke's house. Edwards advised not to rely too much on her words for now, and to wait a bit until the woman calmed down. After listening to him, the Emperor asked his assistant since when he had become so cautious, stating that all of this was very, very strange. Adrian rose from the throne and headed towards Kamar. He put his sword to Edward's neck and declared that he would give him only one chance for an honest answer. The Emperor wanted to know what kind of relationship his assistant had with Bella. The heroine sat on Aaron's bed and read him a bedtime story about a white swan. When the boy fell asleep, she gently stroked his head and left the room. The Duke was sitting in his study working when there was a sudden knock at his door. Ryan didn't expect to see anyone at this hour, but Bella walked into the room. Besides the Duke, Rosine was also in the room. She hadn't left his side lately. When Ryan asked what brought her there, Bella handed him an envelope and announced that she was resigning from her position as nanny. The Duke asked her not to make him laugh and replied that he would reject her application. He wanted to know why the girl had suddenly made such an abrupt decision, but she just smiled silently. The heroine understood that she could never tell him the real reason. So she stated that she had health problems and planned to return to her hometown to rest a bit. The news that the girl was ill so agitated Ryan that he jumped out of his seat. Without taking his eyes off her, he approached Bella to find out her diagnosis. To his dismay, Ryan noticed her flinch away from him at that moment. Trying not to look him in the eyes, the heroine stated that it was a personal matter and she couldn't name it. The Duke refused to fire Bella and instead offered her a health leave. Emotions overwhelmed the girl, so she apologized and ran out of the office. Ryan rushed after her, trying to stop her. However, Rosine suddenly intervened. She promised to talk to Bella and asked him to just wait. Ryan remained standing in the room, staring blankly and refusing to believe what had happened. The heroine ran down the corridor, thinking only about why he looked at her that way, just when she had finally managed to harden her own heart. Suddenly, Rosine called out to her from behind and asked her to stop. Catching up with the girl, she grabbed her hand and suggested they talk. Rosine led Bella to the living room, sat her on the sofa, and asked why she was quitting and not taking a vacation as Ryan had suggested. At that moment, the woman seemed so kind to the heroine that she even regretted having suspected her at first. The girl replied that the Duke didn't give her days off and made her work a lot, so she was very tired. As proof of her words, she smiled and asked to keep it a secret from the master. Rosine looked closely at Bella and asked if that was truly the only reason for her decision. The heroine once again confirmed her words and pulled out a notebook from her breast pocket. In it, she had written some notes on how best to care for Aaron. But Rosine refused to take it, stating that what she needed was not that, but for the girl to stay and work with them. However, Bella replied that she would be fine, and the lady would be able to give her son much more than she ever could. With these words, she said goodbye, bowed, and left through the door. A satisfied smile flitted across Rosine's lips. Gathering her belongings, the heroine entered the Duke's study, where he was no longer present. On top of her resignation letter, she placed another envelope. After standing there for a while longer, Bella turned around and left the office. As she walked out the gate, she thought that she had gone too far and could no longer hesitate. She shouldn't forget why she came here, finding herself in this world, because she needed to prevent Ryan's death and Aaron's transformation into a villain. Her departure was the last piece of the puzzle, and if she left now, there would be a happy ending. Mentally bidding farewell to Ryan and Aaron, the heroine exited the gates of the ducal estate.